Chapter 419. The confrontation between the two had only lasted for a dozen breaths. In such a short time, perhaps mortals had only walked a few dozen steps. However, it was also in such a short time that many things had disappeared. Originally, this was the main camp of the Qing army with many soldiers, tents, supplies and food. Now, looking down, there was only a very precise circle on the ground. This circle was the cross-section between the light shield of the heart of azure glaze and the ground. Outside the cross-section, large numbers of mortals were fleeing in all directions. Even their pious faith in the Dragon King and their anger toward the Xianmen could not stop them. This was because they saw the scene inside the cross-section. There was only a pool of burning lava. When the demon clone of a Deshang Jinren exploded, the energy that was released was not something that ordinary things could resist. If there was anything left, it would be a cocoon that looked small when looking down from the sky. This cocoon was actually a light shield. The runes on it flowed with mysterious light, resisting the erosion of the lava on the ground. It was third cultivator of true virtue who had been blown off the cloud by Li Yunxin. Wei River Dragon King, who had lost 2 clones in a row, stood quietly in the sky. It seemed that he had suffered a serious injury, or perhaps he had not expected that the super-powerful attack of the 2 clones with 2 powerful magic treasures would not have any effect. He stopped the momentum of the fierce attack. The scales on his body opened and closed as if he was breathing and adjusting his breath, as if he was already a little exhausted. The fierce battle just now had triggered a surge of demonic power and spiritual energy into the sky. He adjusted his breath for a while, then turned his head slightly to look into the distance. The black tower where the cultivators gathered several li away was only a thin line from such a high altitude. But now, the thin line seemed to be lit up with a light that was difficult to detect. It seemed that the cultivators in the tower had been alarmed by the movement here and were rushing over. Gold Photon also saw the movement, so he turned the Dragon God token at his fingertips and sighed. Earlier, I told the 3 of them to go back and report, but you had to stop them. Now that the people over there have been alarmed, most of the cultivators in the tower are Xianmen who will die in the Yi Kingdom, not our people. When they get here, Li Yunxin will not be as easy to talk to as I am. Let me ask you again, your heart must be very bitter, right? Li Yunxin suddenly raised his head and said. The previous explosion had already swept away the dark clouds in the sky. At this moment, the moonlight was like water and the night sky was clear. High up in the sky there was only 1 person and 1 demon. And on Li Yunxin's face, the ruthlessness from before had completely disappeared. He had suddenly become calm. Jin Guangzi thought he misheard and frowned. What? Li Yunxin shook his body, and a lot of ashes fell from the gaps between his scales. What I'm saying is, you're a wandering soul and you have emotions. You're not like those Taoist priests who have cultivated themselves into demons. Those Taoist priests disregard human life and kill people as though they are ants. I can understand that. But you. Li Yunxin frowned slightly. You also like to kill indiscriminately. When we were in Changji town, you wanted to kill the little girl beside you, Meng. And now, you want to show off your treasure to me? Li Yunxin sighed. You're so mean and so perverted. You must be very bitter in your heart. After saying this, he suddenly frowned again. What's the hurry? Jin Guangzi frowned even more because of his expression. Some kind of uneasy feeling suddenly spread from the bottom of her heart. She realized that things might be a little wrong. It shouldn't be like this, right? In the battle of more than 10 breaths, she had the upper hand. But now this Li Yunxin suddenly became calm and seemed to have a card up his sleeve. What the hell? She had suffered at Li Yunxin's hands before. Therefore, she subconsciously put the Dragon God token in her hand into her sleeve and made another spell to make the deity cloak and cloud collecting platform shine even brighter. But even so, she still felt a little uneasy. Li Yunxin was really cunning. She gradually couldn't figure out whether he was bluffing or not. Because of this kind of uneasy feeling, she suddenly lost the mood to play and tease. In the end, she had to stand calmly outside the garden and tease the beasts in the garden when they were trapped and helpless. If she slowly realized that the beasts might break free, playing would not only be boring but also frightening. So she stopped smiling. Fine. Since you don't surrender, don't blame me for not leaving you a way out. I'll destroy your body, extract your spirit, and refine it into a wandering soul. At that time I'll see if you still have the appearance you have now. After saying this, she put her palms together in front of her chest and slightly crossed them. In the center of her palms, there was immediately a crackling electric light. The electric light jumped and turned, and in an instant, it gathered into a vortex the size of the mouth of a bowl. It was just that the ordinary vortex was made of water, but this one was made of electricity. In the middle of the vortex, a white light became brighter and brighter, illuminating the vast heaven and earth. It was as if there were 100,000 suns rising between Jin Guangxi's palms. She looked straight at Li Yunxin in the snow-white light, but she saw that he still didn't retreat, nor did he take out any magic weapon. Instead, a magic brush suddenly appeared in his palm. The small magic brush was like a toothpick in the hands of the tall demon god. But Li Yunxin only held it in her hand and began to write something in the void. Jin Guangxi knew that Li Yunxin practiced the painting sect, so she only glanced at it for a moment. But because of this glance she was slightly surprised. She was a wandering soul and self-proclaimed to practice both sword and Dao. So with a glance she could tell that what Li Yunxin was writing now was Dao Tong Talisman. At the same time she also knew that his talisman writing was rusty, as if he had just learned it. Writing talismans in the air was a great test of skill. Even if Li Yunxin had practiced the painting sect before, and some of the principles were the same, he couldn't be as smooth as those cultivators who had been practicing for decades. But why was this demon writing this half-baked Dao Tong talisman at this time? The uneasiness in Jin Guangxi's heart grew stronger. It didn't make sense. In this kind of certain death situation, there was no reason for this Li Yunxin to be like this. Could it be that he still had some way to turn the situation around? All these thoughts flashed through his mind in a flash. And at the same time, the cultivators who flew over from several li away finally arrived. 4 high-level cultivators. The distance of several li was nothing more than a few breaths of time. They all sensed the soaring demon power and spiritual power here, so they knew that the demon coming here might be even more terrifying than expected. He dared to fight to the death with the leader of a Kenzo sect in this kind of place. These cultivators were all cultivators of Dao Tong and Kenzo. They often traveled the world and their attitudes towards demons were the most radical. They only wanted to rid the world of demons and evil, and return peace to the world. Because of this, they became the first batch of people that Jin Guangxi wanted to eliminate. When this profound realm cultivator, 3 true realm cultivators, and nearly 100 transcendent realm cultivators arrived, they saw the dazzling mystic light in Jin Guangxi's palm. So they were slightly surprised. Because this thing was actually quite famous in Dao Tong and Kenzo. It was originally a treasure refined by the 176th generation sword saint. The treasures refined by the sages were originally used by the sages themselves. Ordinary cultivators with slightly lower cultivation levels could not use the treasures of the sages to their full potential, and they might not be able to use the treasures as easily as ordinary treasures. This was like throwing a peerless sword to a child. If they could not even pick it up, how could they talk about other things? Because of this, although the sages of the past left behind many treasures, there were not many that could be used. Only a few true realm and profound realm cultivators could use these treasures, and they would be taken out from the dusty treasure vault and given to people who really needed them. This treasure was one of the easiest to use. It could be used by emptiness realm cultivators. But it was also the most useless one. Only 16 spells were needed to use this thing. It could be used by cultivators above the emptiness realm, and there was no need to spend too much effort on it. Perhaps there was something wrong with the method that was passed down later, but when the later generations used this thing, they found that it didn't have any power. The only advantage it had was that it could safely and steadily channel the violent and unruly spiritual power in the body, like a pipe. It was said that the immortal qi in the body of the 176th generation sword saint had entered the meridians because of some kind of cultivation method, and that was why he refined this thing for himself. After he sorted through the meridians, this thing became useless. But at this moment, these cultivators saw the treasure in Jin Guangxi's palm through the golden light shield of the glazed sword heart. It was shining and had a terrifying aura. Where did this terrifying power come from? But the glazed sword heart was still a relic of the sword saint. Even profound realm Taoists couldn't break it, so they could only stay far away and watch the two fight. Some of the sharp-eyed ones saw Li Yunxin's appearance and recognized him as the 9th son of the dragon, Li Yunxin, also known as the Wei River Dragon King. He had been dealing with the people of Dao Tong and Kenzo for a long time, and many people knew his appearance and temperament. Now the cultivators and the Shenmen knew what he looked like: black scales, red horns, and liked to wear white when he transformed into a human. Looking at his appearance now, how could they not know? This dragon's son is bold. He dares to come here and seek death. It looks like he is on par with the Golden Light sect leader. Someone couldn't help but sigh. High-level cultivators' hearts were as calm as water, and they wouldn't say such meaningless words. The one who said this was a transcendent realm cultivator. The Taoist heart of a transcendent realm cultivator was not stable, and they would have many worldly emotions. Therefore, when they saw the current Li Yunxin, they felt a little emotional and yearned for great power. But the true state cultivator's eyes were much sharper than theirs. He only snorted softly. Look more carefully. What's in the Golden Light sect leader's palm? What's outside of my body? The one profound realm, 3 true realms, and nearly 100 transcendent realms that came here were not from the same sect, but the Black Tower that had time to spare, and all came as reinforcements. But now that they saw such a scene, they were not in a hurry. Therefore, a true state expert raised his hand and pointed from afar. Now, the great battle between the Xianmen and the demons is imminent. Many of you have been cultivating in seclusion on normal days. Occasionally, you walk in the human world, and those you meet are just some small demons. A true state great demon like Dragon 9, however, is very rare. He then pointed at the distant Golden Light sect that was completely enveloped by the glaring profound light. There are countless treasures in our Xianmen, but the treasures left behind by the saints are also rare. Until now, it was the Golden Light sect leader who used the treasures on him to fight against the Dragon 9 Cheese Kiss. The key points within are enough for you to comprehend for decades. Today you have received such an opportunity, so you have to look carefully. In the future, when you fight with the demons, you will have a plan in mind. When they said these words, it was also when the Golden Light sect leader activated the spell, and a white light appeared in his palm. It was also when that Li Yunxin was writing the Daotong talisman with an unfamiliar technique. This kind of scene was extremely rare. It did not look like a battle between cultivators and demons, but more like 2 cultivators practicing. Therefore, someone couldn't help but frown. This demon knows our Daotong talisman? The 3 true state cultivators also frowned slightly. They knew about the painting sect. But they were secretive about it, and did not mention it to the low-level disciples. It was said that before Li Yunxin became a demon, he had practiced the painting sect's method, so it was not strange that he knew how to use Dao arts. Thereupon he said, there are evil demons and unorthodox sects who resort to trickery. What will it do? It's nothing more than being at a dead end, and using this kind of clumsy method to save the situation. But look carefully, how is his method of writing Dao talisman compared to yours? Someone looked for a while and let out a sigh of relief. Not as good as us. The true realm cultivator smiled. Fiendish demons are known for their powerful bodies. But our profound gate cultivators are more intelligent than stupid demons, using Dao arts and treasures to win. Right now, sect leader Golden Light sect has a celestial cloak and a cloud harvesting platform. He also has such a spirit treasure in his hand, it looks like he is going to fight this demon's body head-on. It can also be considered teaching these evil demons a lesson, if they rely on themselves. As he said this, the profound realm cultivator standing in the air in front of him, who had not said a word, suddenly frowned and said to himself, "Huh? This talisman written by the demon." In the next moment, this profound realm cultivator suddenly fiercely hit the light barrier in front of him, but couldn't break it in a short time. Then he shouted again. "Stop." But before he said this, the dazzling white light in Golden Light sect's palm had already reached its peak. But the trace of uneasiness in her heart still dispersed. Thus she frowned and said in a low voice, "Li Yunxin, do you know this 4th treasure of mine? It's called the Mirror of the Realm." Li Yunxin suddenly laughed and clearly said this name. This was the name of the treasure in Golden Light sect's hand. Golden Light sect was stunned. But the power in the Mirror of the Realm in his palm had already accumulated to its peak, and a violent aura wreaked havoc in the narrow space, even attracting the solidified demon power in the cloud harvesting platform, turning it into an even more blazing white light. It was at this time that she heard a fierce shout. The voice was extremely far away, as if it came from outside the golden light barrier of the glazed sword heart. "Stop." Chapter 420. But at this moment she didn't only hear the word "stop," because she saw Li Yunxin draw a line in the air, as if he had completed a talisman. But Jean Photon couldn't see what this talisman was for. Then his body suddenly expanded and scales stood up. He revealed a fierce and ruthless grin, and his mouth was full of shiny fangs. "I also know that your 5th treasure is called Immortal Bone." Along with this thunderous voice, a fiend god shot out like lightning. This time, Li Yunxin's momentum was fiercer than the previous 2 times, and his speed couldn't be mentioned in the same breath. It was as if the previous 2 clones were just strolling, but now they were running for their lives. There was a series of rumbling explosions in the air. Before his voice died away, he had already rushed to the front of the golden photon. Even the tiniest crack on the golden photon scales could be seen clearly. Jean Photon's fourth treasure, which was in her hand at the moment, was called the Mirror of the World. And her fifth treasure was also called the Bone of the Immortal. Li Yunxin was right. How did he know? The shout of the profound realm cultivator and Li Yunxin's roar simultaneously entered her ears. In this instant, in this short moment, before a mosquito could even flap its wings once, many thoughts surged into her mind at the same time. Li Yunxin's plan to escape through death was seen through. Why didn't he immediately turn around and leave? His two real bodies were both destroyed. Why did he do such a stupid thing? Why did he ask her if she felt bitter? Why did he become so calm? Why did he smile at her? Why did he say those words? Why? Why did he, the meticulous and arrogant Jean Photon, this time treated this enemy who had defeated her once very seriously? Thus, she focused 120% of her attention, taking in his every move and expression in a panoramic view. But at this moment, many expressions that made her feel uneasy, happy, or confused, all rushed into her mind. It was as if every subtle expression on her face meant something. It was as if she finally knew where her growing uneasiness came from. However, she couldn't catch it. She could not grasp any definite thought, any definite conclusion, to tell herself whence the uneasiness came. But something wasn't right. The shout of the profound realm cultivator had once again deepened this thought of hers, causing the uneasiness in her heart to completely transform into fear. It was also because of that shout and Li Yunxin's ferocious performance. There was no other thought in Jing Guangxi's mind. There was only one thing left: kill him. All the problems would be solved, right? Thus the final hand seal was formed. The mirror of the world in his palms, which was so bright that it seemed to take away all the light in the world, immediately shot out a terrifying power. A terrible explosion occurred. It occurred in this space that was enveloped by the mystic light of the glazed sword heart. Energy shot out from the bright spot on the mirror of the Ukiyo in Jean Photon's hand. In the blink of an eye, it filled the entire spherical barrier. Previously, when Li Yunxin's incarnation exploded, there was a similar scene. But at that time at least there were flames, smoke, and flying debris. But this time, there were only colorful dragons of fire and lightning entangled with each other, rolling, expanding, and destroying crazily in every inch of space. This terrible scene happened in an instant. The fire and lightning came head-on, but were trapped inside the glazed barrier. Even so, many of the cultivators in the transcendent state could not help but tilt their heads back, as if a strong wind was blowing against them. Before the terrible explosion occurred, the profound realm cultivator shouted, "Stop!" It was extremely difficult for such an expert to lose his composure like this. Therefore, the surprise in the hearts of the cultivators was far greater than the surprise caused by the terrible explosion. But at this moment, the profound realm cultivator did not say a word again. The light barrier created by the glazed sword heart covered an area with a radius of 1 mile. Now, it was filled with violent turbulence of energy, and it was even more dazzling than the sun. Compared to this huge light ball, the group of over 100 cultivators was just a small black dot. The entire camp of the Allied army, and even the area several miles away, was illuminated by this light, as if it were daytime. What a terrible power! This is the power of dozens of perfected Taoist masters. The profound realm cultivator silently faced the raging waves of fire that were less than 3 inches away from him, and let out a deep sigh. The glazed sword heart was a relic left by the sword saint. The golden light of the true realm cultivator was intertwined with this treasure, so the power of this mystic light barrier alone was not far from that of the sages in the past, and he could not easily break it. Hearing his sigh, the true realm cultivator hesitated for a while, and then asked cautiously, "Sect leader, why did you shout just now? Did something go wrong?" His question was also what the nearly 100 cultivators behind him wanted to ask. In fact, with this profound realm cultivator here, these people were not very worried about any demons or devils. This profound realm cultivator was in the profound realm of Shi, and his Taoist name was Dry Cicada. He used to be the head of the Penglai Paradise, one of the 18 paradises of Daotong. But later, the head of the Langya Paradise, Kuan Wuzi, was killed, and he succeeded as the head of the Langya Paradise. Everyone who followed such an expert to this place actually had the intention of learning and observing. That ignorant demon had come here to behave atrociously so they could use it to train their troops. But now, unexpectedly, this sect leader Dry Cicada had lost his composure. Hearing the true realm cultivator's question, Dry Cicada remained silent for a while. The fiery clouds inside the glazed light barrier had not yet dispersed, and they seemed to be burning even more fiercely. After 2 breaths of time, Dry Cicada sighed again, pointed at the inside of the light barrier, and said without turning his head, "Let me ask you. Do you know what's the deal with the immortal cloak, the heaven and earth mirror, the cloud harvesting platform, and the world mirror that our sect leader is wearing?" He was asking you. Therefore, everyone knew that there was a need to consider it. Therefore, they were relieved. The fact that a profound realm cultivator could consider them in this terrible battlefield showed that everything was still under his control. Of course, the true realm cultivator would not answer this question. Therefore, a transcendent realm cultivator thought for a while and said, "Sect leader. According to what I have learned from my daily cultivation, when these 4 treasures are placed side by side, they can form a Tao artifact." Dry Cicada did not speak, and only looked at the fiery clouds close at hand. But the true realm cultivator behind him knew what he was thinking and said, "Sect leader's original intention was for you to complement each other's weaknesses and strengths. Since you have said it, tell us the whole story. If there are any brothers who have neglected something, you can check and fill in the gaps. Let me ask you again on behalf of sect leader, what is a Tao artifact?" The Taoist priest in the transcendent realm seemed to know some of the mysteries of the profound gate. Therefore, when he heard this question, he smiled slightly. He was not afraid of the fiery clouds that seemed to pierce through the sky and the earth, not far away. Allow me to explain in detail. The cultivators in the profound gate pay attention to refining the body and the spirit in order to ascend to heaven. However, the path of cultivation is long and dangerous, and there are evil spirits roaming the world, so there will always be fights. Since there is a fight, there must be a way to fight. The Deva passed down the Tao, and the senior masters forged the treasures. For us cultivators, the body is a precious cauldron, and it is very precious. Even if we are strong, we can't be like the stupid demons and use the body as a weapon. Therefore, the treasures are our weapons. However, human power is sometimes limited. There is always a limit to a person's power. There is also a limit to the power of a treasure. However, if we use a strange method to combine several treasures, and let them perform their respective duties, we can unleash the power of a treasure that is several times stronger than a single treasure. When the cultivator in the transcendent realm said this, only a dozen breaths had passed. But the ground was already in chaos. How could a mortal see such a scene? Moreover, it suddenly appeared in the camp at night. For a moment, on the ground that was as bright as day, tens of thousands of soldiers were in a mess. Looking down from the sky, they looked like ants whose nest was dug out. They were running and trampling, there were countless casualties, and they were about to collapse. However, the hundreds of cultivators in the sky did not even look at the mortals who were like ants on the ground, who were originally here to transport the red soil for them. The Taoist priest in the transcendent realm continued, for example, the 4 treasures on the Golden Light sect leader. I am bold enough to deduce the thought process of the battle with the demon just now. I think it should be like this. The celestial cloak is used for protection to lure the enemy. To lure the demon to attack with full force, the more vicious the better. On the way here, Headmaster Ku Chanzi said that he was investigating the demon's demonic power, and it seems that he is already at the level of an adept master. Just now, he also said that the power inside the shield is equivalent to the full force attack of dozens of adept masters. It seems that the stupid demon took the bait, and used all his strength together with the Golden Light sect leader. The demon used 10 parts of his strength, so the celestial cloak was returned to him 11 parts. Meanwhile, the dissipating spiritual power and demonic power were absorbed by the magic treasure, the Cloud Harvester. The celestial cloak and the Cloud Harvester, these 2 treasures together can protect the Golden Light sect leader like an iron bastion, just like now. The Taoist priest took another look at the giant fireball. The light was still dazzling. Did not look like a fireball anymore. Instead, it looked more like an alchemy cauldron that was casually tossed onto the ground by a celestial being. It strengthened the terrifying power that originally belonged to the demon, and turned it into a terrifying true fire, intending to burn the demon's strong body into ashes. This is defense. The Taoist priest exhaled lightly. There is also offense. Attack with the Wuxia mirror. The Wuxia mirror can return all the powerful power within the Cloud Harvester to the demon. No matter how strong his body is, he will not be able to last long in a cauldron like this. I think the Golden Light sect leader is being protected firmly by the celestial cloak and the Cloud Harvester, and is using the Wuxia mirror to pursue and attack the demon. The demon will definitely not be able to escape. The Chindi mirror can illuminate heaven and earth, and in such a small area, there is nowhere for him to hide. These 4 treasures, have both offense and defense, and their coordination is smooth and perfect. They can almost be said to be made by nature. Therefore this type is called a Tao artifact. Now that the Golden Light sect leader is using this Tao artifact to deal with the demon, it is somewhat like using a butcher's knife to kill a chicken. He finished saying these words calmly. Some cultivators looked emotional, while others looked as if they had understood something, as if they had really heard something that they did not understand before. Moreover, there seemed to be quite a number of people like this. The true realm cultivator nodded. You're right. This Tao artifact Tao was something that the current saint had comprehended 1,000 years ago. In the tens of thousands of years of history of the Taoist sects, it is considered a novel thing. Alas, I can only sigh that there are not many treasures that we can use among the saints' relics. Until now, in nearly 1,000 years, there are only 3 so-called Tao artifacts. After sighing with emotion, he looked at Ku Chanzi again. Headmaster. After a while, Ku Chanzi sighed. Therefore I asked her to stop, just now. He shook his head and finally turned around. Our great battle with the demon is imminent. The saint bestowed this Tao artifact to the Golden Light sect. It should be the saint's intention, so I can't say anything else. But now. Ku Chanzi frowned slightly. The Golden Light sect leader seems to have enmity with this Longjiu. Now that he has encountered it, the hatred in his heart has deepened. He actually used this glazed sword heart to trap the two of them, and then used this Tao artifact to refine the demon Li Yunxin alive in the formation. But I saw that the demon wrote a talisman just now. Although what he wrote was unfamiliar, it looked like it was a spell related to another treasure of my Daotong. Ku Chanzi frowned. A demon named Dragons actually obtained the spell of a saint's relic. This is no small matter, so I asked the Golden Light sect leader to stop and let that demon live so that I can carefully interrogate him. But who knew? Alas. Sect leader, you don't have to worry about this, the true realm cultivator said in a low voice. After all, that Longjiu is a dragon's with a strong body. He has already refined him for a while. Although he can't hold on any longer, he won't die immediately. If the Golden Light sect leader really has a great enmity with him and has a tribulation in his heart, I think he won't die so easily. Leaving a broken body, sect leader can borrow it for interrogation first, and then return it to the Golden Light sect leader. If she accidentally refined that Li Yunxin to death, we can also capture his soul and interrogate him. There's no need to be in such a hurry. Ku Chanzi shook his head slightly. Even so, alas. In fact, there were still some words that he didn't say. Even if he was the sect leader of the Langya Cave and a profound realm cultivator, there were some words that he couldn't say to these disciples. That Golden Light sect seemed a little strange. It seemed to be hiding something. If what he was worried about was true, maybe she wouldn't leave a living mouth, or a soul that can be interrogated. This stupid demon. What on earth did it want to do in this place? Could it be that it really came to die? Ku Chanzi sighed again. By this time, the terrifying thunder fire in the glazed light shield had been refined for the time it took for half an incense stick to burn. Ku Chanzi sighed and planned to turn around and use his divine sense to explore the situation inside. Although Golden Light sect's cultivation wasn't as good as his, he was still a sect leader. Now that they were fighting with the demon, it was a taboo for him to use his divine sense to explore. However, now that things had come to this, he couldn't care so much about the incantation that the demon had gotten from somewhere. But at this moment, he suddenly found that the cultivators in front of him who had been listening respectfully to his teachings, his eyes widened abruptly as he stared fixedly at the person behind him. Ku Chanzi's heart skipped a beat. Did she refine that demon to death? It was Golden Light sect. He frowned and also turned around. He saw a figure propping its hands on the glazed light shield of the sword heart, like a drowning person knocking on a fish tank and trying to rush out. Then, it was pulled back by someone or something in the surging fire. That figure was Golden Light sect leader. Her face was full of extreme fear and pain. Chapter 421. Therefore these cultivators were all stunned. After 2 breaths, a Taoist priest said, "Is that the head of the Golden Light sect?" Of course they recognized the Golden Light, but they were not sure about the figure that appeared in the flame just now. That was to say, if a person's skin was burnt, his hair was burnt, his nose was left with 2 black holes, his lips were gone, leaving only 2 rows of blackened teeth, and his 2 eyeballs were also burst open, it was hard to tell whether that person was someone or not. However, since she appeared in this light shield and the tattered clothes she wore did belong to the head of the Kenzo Wujin sword sect, then it should be her, right? How could it be like this? Where are her immortal cloak and cloud-collecting platform? After the Taoist priest said this, another person said in a low voice, "Did you see what was behind her just now?" The flame inside the light shield was like the thickest fog in the early morning of autumn. When the golden light rushed out of the flame, it caused the flame to roll, as if someone suddenly rushed out of the fog. But in fact, she only appeared for a very short time. Because she was immediately pulled back, those with good eyesight saw the thing that pulled her back. It was a claw with dark golden scales and sharp claws on its fingertips. That was not a human's hand, but a demon's hand, the hand of Long's son. "Open it." Ku Chanzi didn't sigh like them. Instead, he hit the light shield of the glazed sword heart with his palm. In an instant, the light shield flickered as if there were countless colors flowing around it. Suddenly, the light shield was blasted 3 meters away. However, it was still not broken. To Ku Chanzi, the size of this light shield was like that of a rubber ball to an ant. But such a huge thing was pushed more than 3 meters away by his palm, which showed how terrible the power of a mysterious realm Taoist was. After the first attack failed, Ku Chanzi made another one. His palm was very slow, as if he was beating an old man who was strengthening his body in his leisure time. However, the power of this slow palm was more powerful. As soon as they touched the light shield, a violent hurricane was created. The 3 true realm cultivators were still standing, but the hundreds of transcendent realm cultivators behind them were blown away and almost fell from the sky. The second palm struck out another 10 feet. But it still didn't break. At this time, Ku Chanzi finally let out a cry of surprise. He had seen Jin Guoguo's glazed sword heart, a golden halo with 36 small swords swimming in it. The golden light had refined the sword saint's relic with its own life force. It could almost be said that the two had fused into one. The outer layer of light was refined into her muscles, bones, skin, and flesh, strengthening her body. The 36 light swords inside were refined into the snow mountain and ocean of Qi to enhance her spiritual power cultivation. When she fought with others, she would first summon this light barrier to envelop both sides. It was as if the enemy was fighting inside her body. 36 golden swords appeared and disappeared unpredictably. They were extremely powerful. A saint's treasure is meant to be used by a saint. If a cultivator below the Grand Supreme Realm didn't have enough cultivation, the power of their treasures would be greatly reduced. Jin Guoguo used her own life force to refine it, which was equivalent to sacrificing her own life force. Even a profound realm cultivator couldn't match its power. However, since Jin Guoguo was at a disadvantage, why didn't she open the light barrier and ask them to go in and help her? This was the question on all the cultivators' minds except for him. They all knew that the glazed sword heart was Jin Guoguo's natal treasure. Therefore, when they saw Ku Chanzi suddenly attack the light barrier, they were all stunned. After Ku Chanzi attacked for the second time, the true realm cultivator said, "Master? Why did you do that?" Ku Chanzi stopped temporarily and frowned. He seemed to be talking to himself or explaining to the others, "Something's wrong. That demon. Just now, I found out that the last talisman was a spell of the Immortal's Bone. You should know about the Immortal's Bone. Sect Master Jin Guoguo's glazed sword heart. Wasn't it sent back the day before yesterday?" The Transcendent Realm cultivators didn't quite understand Ku Chanzi's words, but the 3 true realm cultivators were stunned at the same time and seemed to have understood. They all knew about the Immortal's Bone. In fact, every cultivator who entered the true realm would receive a treasure book, Records of Universal Spiritual Treasures, compiled by the Zhou Tian Lingbao School of Daotong. The name of this book described all kinds of treasures in this world. The treasures left by the sages of Daotong and Kenzo were also included in it. The 3 of them knew that Sect Master Jin Guoguo was defeated and severely injured in Changji town. They also knew that her cultivation base was almost completely crippled because her natal treasure was taken away. However, they also knew that Jin Guoguo was summoned to Mount Shaoyun by the 2 sages a few days ago and was given a Dao item: the deity cloak, the cloud collecting platform, the Tiandi mirror, and the world mirror. Now that they heard Ku Chanzi say that Jin Guoguo's natal treasure, the glazed sword heart, was sent back the day before yesterday, they realized Jin Guoguo's cultivation base was almost crippled when she was summoned to Mount Shaoyun. How did she recover from her serious injuries and become able to use this Dao item? When Ku Chanzi mentioned the Immortal's Bone, they immediately understood. The Immortal's Bone, as the name suggested, had the miraculous effect of remolding one's body and remolding one's realm. However, this treasure had one drawback. Once it was refined into one's body, it would be extremely difficult for one's cultivation base to improve. It would be impossible for one to reach the Grand Supreme Realm. What high-level cultivators wanted was nothing more than longevity. Very few people were willing to deal with this treasure. Then Jing Guogua must have received the immortal's bone and recovered her realm before she could use the Dao item. Then, the day before yesterday, she obtained the glazed sword heart and refined this treasure again. Before Jing Guogua made her final attack, Ku Chanzi saw Li Yunxin write a talisman in the air. It was the immortal's bone technique. Let's not talk about how he came to know about this technique for now. Could it be that he knew another way to make the immortal's bone in Jing Guogua's body lose its effect? Then Jing Guogua would naturally be unable to use the immortal cloak and the cloud collecting platform. That was why she ended up in such a sorry and terrible state just now. However, her treasure was broken and she was at a disadvantage. Why didn't she disperse the glazed sword heart's shield and ask for help? Ku Chanzi had heard of Li Yunxin's reputation before. Although he didn't take Jing Guogua seriously with his profound realm cultivation base, he knew that for Jing Guogua, this demon was still difficult to deal with. It was also because he knew about Jing Guogua's past that when he saw the horrifying golden light in the fire screen, he immediately thought of this and tried to break the light shield to rescue her. However, after failing to break the shield with 2 palm strikes in a row, another idea suddenly came to his mind. From Jing Guogua's appearance to Ku Chanzi's 2 palm strikes, the 3 true realm cultivators also understood this matter in a very short time. When the 3 true realm cultivators thought of this, their first thought was exactly the same as Ku Chanzi's: break the shield and rescue her quickly. Therefore, without saying a word, they brazenly launched a palm strike. But right at this moment, Ku Chanzi suddenly shouted again, "Stop!" This was the second time he said the same thing in less than a quarter of an hour. However, this time, it was also too late. San Shio's fierce palm strike had already landed on the light shield. Although it didn't go more than 10 feet away like Ku Chanzi's attack, it made the light shield fluctuate and shake for a while. San Shio didn't understand what Ku Chanzi meant. He frowned slightly and was about to ask, but all of a sudden, in front of them, the fiery cloud inside the shield rolled again, and revealed the golden light again. Seeing this golden light again, everyone was stunned. They were even more surprised than when they first saw her. Because when they first saw her, her face was horrible and ferocious, as if she was about to be burned alive. But this golden light in front of them, although her face was pale, her hair was slightly messy, and there were traces of blood on the corners of her mouth, her clothes were intact, and they could even see 2 extremely weak layers of mysterious light protecting her. They were the immortal cloak and the cloud collecting platform. Before the cultivators could say anything, the golden light had already shouted, "Why did you harm me?" Before his voice faded away, the fiery cloud was parted once again. Dragon Sun Changwen, with his dark golden fiend god body, pounced over and struck the golden light from the back with an incomparably fierce and powerful strike. At that time, the golden light was questioning the cultivator outside the light shield and was distracted by this attack. She opened her mouth and blood gushed out of it. Just as she was about to speak, Li Yunxin's palms arrived once again. The golden light could only turn around and flee, forced to retreat by this demon. Li Yunxin's momentum didn't decrease, and his palms slammed on the light shield with a loud bang. Then he turned around and chased after the golden light shield. As soon as Li Yunxin left, the fire cloud was parted once again. Everyone saw a big ghost with a golden light and a ferocious face flash in the fire. Before he could figure out where this ghost had come from, another one emerged from the fire and followed the previous one's path. Then came the 3rd, the 4th, and the 5th. They left very fast and had different appearances. There were 36 of them, as if all the soldiers under Li Yunxin's command were following him. The cultivators were stunned again. These big ghosts could come and go freely in such a fire cloud, which showed that their cultivation was extremely high, and they were also ghost kings in the true realm. 36 ghost kings appeared here. How could they not know about it? They had never heard of it. There were so many ghost kings in the true realm in the world. However, before Li Yunxin turned around, he did one more thing. He smiled wickedly at the cultivators outside the light shield, moved his lips and seemed to say something. When Li Yunxin, who was covered in smoke and whose armor had turned red because of the fire, disappeared again in the surging fire, and the big ghost also disappeared in the fire, the cultivators realized that according to his lips, he should have said, "Thank you." But no one wanted to say these words out loud. After a full 3 breaths, Ku Chanzi slowly spat out a few words. "What a good demon. How dare you plot against me?" Chapter 422. Just a quarter of an hour ago, after Jean Guangwen had finally activated the Yukio mirror, She did indeed have the intention that Ku Chanzi had mentioned to the cultivators. She wanted to refine Li Yunxin to death in this glazed golden light shield. She naturally hated this demon for seriously injuring her earlier. She also hated his unruly appearance and how he still didn't take her seriously. However, the most important thing was what the two sages had told her in Little Cloud Mountain. In fact, what the two sages had told her in Little Cloud Mountain was the complete opposite of what she was doing now. The two sages had originally asked her to persuade Li Yunxin with courtesy, to bring him to Little Cloud Mountain. During this period they had said many things, such as Li Yunxin's character, aptitude, attitude towards the Freemasonry and many other things. But Jin Guangwen's conclusion after listening to them was that the Freemasonry was very interested in recruiting him. At least, the two sages were interested in recruiting him. This demon had always been against the Freemasonry, but he was still valued so much. She really threw herself in. What kind of good days would she, the gold photon, have? Li Yunxin's talent was outstanding and full of tricks. But because she was seriously injured, she had to refine the immortal's bone into her body, and it was difficult for her cultivation to improve. Everything was because of him, but now she had to welcome him. She could welcome him. However, the one who came back was a wandering soul who had lost his mind, so she couldn't be blamed. So she used the Yukio mirror to kill him. Not only did she want to kill Li Yunxin, but she also wanted to refine him to death in the glazed golden light shield, to vent the hatred in her heart. However, after the powerful force blasted out, she immediately felt the spiritual power in her snow mountain and ocean of chi suddenly stagnated. Then she felt extreme pain in her limbs, acupoints and meridians, as if her bones, flesh and tendons were about to be extracted alive. This feeling, she had already experienced it once before. It was the time when the glazed sword heart was extracted. But this time, it wasn't the glazed sword heart that was being extracted, but the immortal's bone in her body. Jin Guangwen was immediately shocked. She used all her spiritual power to protect her snow mountain and ocean of chi. But at this moment, Li Yunxin had already rushed in front of her, resisting the flames. If she didn't hear wrongly, she seemed to hear Li Yunxin ask in the roaring flames, "What's next? Who is he talking to?" But she immediately remembered that a dozen breaths ago, after the demon's second incarnation exploded, he suddenly became calm and collected. He stood in the sky and talked to her, during which he even said, "Why are you in such a hurry?" Although Jin Guangzi was a little surprised, he didn't think too much about it. Because this Li Yunxin's actions and words had always been strange, who knew what he would suddenly think of? But now that Jin Guangzi thought of this, he finally realized that the strong sense of unease he felt before was indeed not an illusion. Many details hinted at one thing: Li Yunxin's abnormal behavior seemed to be because he had a helper. She finally understood this point, but it was already too late. Li Yunxin arrived from the side. He seemed to have heard something from one of the beings he asked, and laughed in the thick cloud of fire. "Good, good, good." Then, his left and right hands formed a finger seal and he slammed them together. Jin Guangwen immediately felt that something was exploding in her body. The immortal's bone that had already seeped into her internal organs, snow mountain and ocean of energy, was forcefully pulled out by Li Yunxin's spell and hand seal, shattering into pieces in her body. The spiritual power in her chest stagnated and she felt dizzy. She only felt that the world was spinning and she almost fainted. She should have fainted. But fortunately she took back the glazed sword heart from Kong Tongzi the day before yesterday. But at that time her body had already refined the immortal's bone, so she couldn't refine the glazed sword heart as her natal magic weapon, so she just carried it with her as an ordinary treasure. But after all, she had cultivated that treasure for a long time so she could still use it easily and smoothly. Now she shouldn't die so quickly. The immortal's bone was destroyed, and the snow mountain and ocean of chi in her body were on the verge of collapse, so she almost couldn't control the deity cloak and the cloud collector platform. Without these two treasures to protect her, how could her body compare to Long Sun's? She was afraid that she would immediately be burned into ashes by the fire. But after all, she still operated the glazed sword heart. She made up her mind, gritted her teeth, and immediately fought with Li Yunxin while refining the glazed sword heart on the spot. She wanted to refine it back into her snow mountain and ocean of chi. Among all the cultivators in the world, how many people could achieve this? If the later generations knew about Jin Guangwen's move, they would definitely be amazed by her cultivation, methods, and unparalleled determination. But for her, it was just a strand of obsession as a wandering soul. She had already been defeated by Li Yunxin once, and she was in a sorry state. If she got so many treasures today and escaped in front of more than 100 cultivators outside the mysterious light shield and was defeated again, how could she still have the face to stand on her feet? The Elder Council had never taken pity on a useless person. After all, she was a cultivator in the realm of truth, and her cultivation was profound. Refining the Glaze Sword Heart in this battle actually showed some signs of success. The spiritual power in the snow mountain and ocean of Qi was filling up bit by bit, and the immortal cloak and the cloud-collecting platform that were about to disappear on his body also blazed up again. Li Yunxin attacked again with 2 palms, but he only hit the cloud collector platform firmly, and he couldn't hurt her at all. Just now, Jin Guangwen suddenly experienced a big change, and under the shock she didn't have any distracting thoughts in her mind, and only focused on refining the glazed sword heart. At this moment the sword heart was a little bit completed, and seeing that Li Yunxin couldn't hurt her for a while, the evil thoughts in her heart suddenly soared. This demon set her up again this time. But now that she had seen through his tricks, she sneered, "Li Yunxin, you have a lot of evil skills. But you didn't expect that I'm still alive after all your schemes, huh?" As she said that, she turned into the flames and dodged. She only cared about refining the glazed sword heart and didn't fight with Li Yunxin. Because Long Sun's body was strong. But in this sea of fire that was equivalent to the full power of dozens of perfected spiritual masters, he seemed to be unable to hold on. His scales were burning red, and his mane and horns were also on fire. The skin and flesh on his face were scorched, and he was just an arrow at the end of its flight. Every breath he took was filled with flames. How long could he, a member of the royal family in the water, last? This fiendish demon had schemed and schemed against him, and now he was the one to blame. The golden light also laughed wildly. Good, good, good. Li Yunxin, you want to break my protective magic treasure and refine me to death. Today I'll fulfill your wish. I'll trap you in this shield, and I'll see who will die. I'll also let you taste the feeling of your meridians, bones, and flesh being burned out bit by bit. Chapter 423. Since Gold Photon had made up her mind, she could only keep dodging, hoping to buy as much time as possible. In fact, the immortal bone that she had refined was destroyed by Li Yunxin. It was like her body was suddenly cut open with countless fresh wounds. Now that she had forcefully refined the glazed sword heart, it was more like she was stuffing something else into those wounds. Refining a magic weapon wasn't something that could be done in a day. But now that she was enduring such terrible pain, it was nothing more than a breath of air. The more unbearable the pain in her body, the stronger that breath of air was, and the more she wanted to refine Li Yunxin to death in her array. And that Li Yunxin didn't seem to expect Gold Photon to have such a fierce character. He had taken advantage of the time when the 2 magic weapons protecting her gradually weakened to launch a fierce attack, but they were all blocked. After another 5 or 6 breaths, Gold Photon gathered more and more spiritual energy, and the light from the immortal cloak and the cloud harvesting platform became brighter and brighter. At this point, attacking her again would be completely useless. Moreover, Long Sun's demonic body was also being refined by the raging true fire until it was bright red, like a piece of fine iron that had been calcined in a furnace for a long time, about to be refined. So his speed gradually slowed down, and it looked like he was indeed gradually unable to hold on. Earlier he had been fiercely attacking while saying some harsh words, but now he didn't even have the time to say any harsh words. He only held his breath and chased after him. It was like he knew he was going to die, and was only relying on his stubbornness to fight for his dignity. One's lost, the other's gain. Gold Photon gradually turned the situation around. She felt the stuffiness that had been accumulating in her chest since Changji Town finally eased up a little. She even had the time to sneer in the raging flames. Li Yunxin, are you still not surrendering? Do you think you can go against the entire Taoist and the Freemasons with that little trick of yours? Speaking up to this point, Li Yunxin gathered all his strength and fiercely attacked again. But Gold Photon only dodged slightly, and Long Sun, who seemed to be at the end of his rope, was thrown off by her. Let me ask you now, who were you talking to just now? Jin Guangzi frowned tightly. The pain of refining the glazed sword heart and the joy of torturing and killing Li Yunxin were tangled together, making her even more energetic. Thus he asked this question without expecting Li Yunxin to answer. Not going to say? Even if you don't say it, I can still guess a thing or two. Ah. Today's trip is really a pleasant surprise. If I kill you, I'll get the remnant soul of a sword saint, right? After she said this, Li Yunxin finally spoke. His voice was extremely distorted in the wind, but she could still hear the surprise in it. Nonsense. Hearing Li Yunxin's words, Gold Photon laughed even more. Back in Changji town, that kid beside you took away my glazed sword heart. When I return to the mountain gate, I will send someone to investigate him. It's fine if we don't investigate, but if we do, we'll find out a shocking secret. So that kid was born with a vision. Unfortunately, we didn't notice him. Some people in the sect have long suspected that the former sword saint didn't pass the tribulation successfully and reincarnated. Now I see it, it's that Yu Meng, right? Hearing this, Li Yunxin didn't say anything and just chased after Yu Meng. But now that Gold Photon's power was increasing, how could he catch up? So I sent someone to Changji town to investigate. They found an abandoned magic array. I think that Yu Meng took away my glazed sword heart with the help of that magic array. Gold Photon enjoyed this feeling very much. While refining Long Sun, she carefully told him his thoughts. Everything was under control. Was there anything more wonderful than this in the world? I think Yu Meng is the reincarnation of the former sword saint. Unfortunately, he was born with a mortal body. Is he hiding in your sleeves now? You're good at using this world and the sleeve spell. Gold Photon sneered. He must have taught you the spell to break the immortal bone. But now, Li Yunxin, the fire in the sword heart is surging. Can you let him out and let him take away my treasure? She said this quickly and anxiously, as if she was spitting out the words she had hidden in her heart for a long time in one breath. It was as if he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to finish speaking before he killed Li Yunxin. Why do you think I continue to take the risk of carrying this glazed sword heart with me? It's because I know this, and I know that if you see me using this thing, you'll use the same trick again. So, I asked for this Taoist instrument. I used this Taoist instrument to fill the sword heart with true fire. Now, even if you have a trick in your heart, you can't use it. I'll let you taste the feeling of despair and unwillingness. She finally said all the words in her heart. However, after hearing these words, Li Yunxin, who was following her closely, suddenly stopped. He stood in the rolling fire wind and was silent for a while. She didn't know what he was doing. Then he said, "You really know about the reincarnation of the sage. No wonder he has to hide." When he said this, his voice was still extremely distorted. But this tone, caused Jin Guangwen's heart to slightly pause, skipping a beat. Then she couldn't stop jumping, as if there was a stag running wildly in her chest. Because his tone became calm again, exactly the same as 10 breaths ago. Because of this sentence, the strong self-confidence that Gold Photon had built up for herself bit by bit was like a sandcastle, collapsing in the waves. This Li Yunxin. Does he still have other tricks? She couldn't help but shout, "Don't pretend to be a god. Conspiracies and schemes are always risky." Li Yunxin interrupted her. Her chest heaved up and down in the fiery wind. She seemed to be out of strength. However, his voice was still calm. This made Gold Photon not know what to do for a moment. The fear of this demon that she had secretly planted in her heart slowly rose again. She even began to think again, after using the Yukio mirror, was Li Yunxin trying to force her to use that trick as soon as possible? Only crushing the opponent's strength, is the safest thing. Li Yunxin ignored her reaction and continued in a calm and unhurried tone. "When you first met me, you were very confident in your brain. Now that you have suffered a few losses, you are still very confident. Since you like to set traps, let me tell you, what is the most taboo in this kind of thing?" Fear finally broke out in Gold Photon's heart again. She gritted her teeth and shouted fiercely, "You are at the end of the road and you still want to delay time like this? How can I be fooled by you?" After saying this, she waved her arms and pointed the sword at Li Yunxin. "Go!" This was the flying attack method of the glazed sword heart. At this time, she had already endured unimaginable pain to refine this magic weapon. The power of the golden light sword was more than several times stronger than before. Using it to deal with the extremely weak Li Yunxin could be said to be in the bag. However, there was no more golden light sword. The 36 light swords that appeared and disappeared mysteriously had disappeared without a trace in the raging sea of fire. Gold Photon was shocked. She made 2 more hand seals, but her spiritual power was still like a clay ox in the sea. At this moment, Li Yunxin did not move in the fire cloud. He only continued to say, "The most taboo is not being flexible and staking everything on one throw." Bah! Gold Photon was shocked and angry. She gave up the idea of using the golden light sword. Instead, she spat out a small green sword from her mouth. This kind of flying sword was a rare treasure for ordinary cultivators, but compared to the several sword saint treasures she had, it was only an inconspicuous plaything. Gold Photon shot this flying sword in one breath. Once the small sword left the protection of the celestial cloak and the cloud harvesting platform, it was immediately refined into a ball of sword energy by the fire cloud. But this sword energy still rushed forward for a long distance and hit the figure of Li Yunxin in the fire cloud. However, the figure disappeared in a flash. It was actually a virtual image. But the voice came from the other side. You also know that I like to scheme and scheme. But do you know how many escape routes I have left and how many changes I have made when I set up the trap? Before I came here, I did not want to fight you in this camp. I planned to go to Cloud Mountain and borrow someone else's hand to kill you. But since you sent yourself to me, I will beat you at your own game. You wish. Gold Photon's attack missed. She turned around and shot another sword energy at the voice. The figure was also hit and scattered, but it was only a virtual image. She shouted angrily, "Let's see how long you can last in this fire cloud." But the angry, fearful, and frightened voice came again. In the past, when I schemed against others, I often failed. But once I fail and realize that things are not what I think they are, I will either immediately fly away, or find another way and find another opportunity to continue the task. I just broke your celestial bone. You should know that there is a terrifying element of uncertainty in your plan. Although you can't think of everything thoroughly with a mistake of this level, shouldn't you immediately run away, or call for help from your comrades outside this light shield? But you still have the courage to continue acting according to your plan. Why don't you think, since I know about your celestial bone, would I also know about other things and how I know about other things? After being asked 2 questions and hit nothing in succession, Gold Photon had already realized that something was wrong. But there was another emotion in her heart that suppressed the thought of running away. This emotion was like a straight and smooth track. Once her thoughts set foot on it, they would rush forward along this track. Even though she kept warning herself that this might not be appropriate, she could not jump out. Because change is always harder than habit. Chapter 424. In the secular world, this kind of thing was called going against a brick wall, or fighting for a breath. However, for Golden Photon and these wandering souls, this kind of thing had a more deadly and direct name: obsession. After all, they were only refined from wandering souls. If they didn't have obsession, how could these ghost cultivators come to be? At this time, Li Yunxin's voice came from the terrible fire. Therefore, I have to tell you another thing: wandering souls like you are not good at playing tricks. Why make things difficult for yourself? When you are proud, you will get carried away because of your obsession. When you are frustrated, you will do what you are doing now. You will make up your mind and go all the way. When you are extreme and persistent, you will lose your mind after a few words. How dare you talk to me about schemes? Golden Photon finally became furious. She roared like a lioness, and the sword energy around her spread out, shooting countless terrible flying swords into the fire clouds. However, they all disappeared without a trace, like clay oxen entering the sea. At this moment, Li Yunxin finally pounced out of the fire. His horns, mane, and scales were all burning, making him look like a flaming man. However, this flaming man's momentum was extremely fierce, as if he would cut Golden Photon with his claws in the next moment. Then he shouted again, "Now that things have come to this, why don't you think about it? Did I waste my time talking to you because I really wanted to teach you, or did I want to do something while I was waiting?" Golden Photon was furious. Finally, Li Yunxin showed up. Instead of dodging, he waved his palms to fight this powerful demon with the help of the immortal cloak and the cloud collecting platform. However, at this moment, an unstoppable and powerful palm force crashed into the mystic light shield of the glazed sword heart. Golden Photon had refined the glazed sword heart to the point of merging with its life. Just as Ku Chanzi said, the mystic light shield merged with the body, and the Golden Photon merged with the snow mountain and ocean of Qi. However, Ku Chanzi didn't know that Golden Photon had refined the treasure in the sea of fire. Therefore, the palm force of the profound realm cultivator was equivalent to hitting Golden Photon's body. The Dharma treasure deflected part of the force. However, the rest wasn't something that a true realm cultivator could easily endure. Golden Light, who was about to face the enemy, suddenly encountered this change. The spiritual power in his body became chaotic and he almost went mad. He spat out a mouthful of blood. However, when it rains, it pours. The demon's sharp claws had already reached him, and behind him, a huge golden god was taking shape. Bang! With an earth-shattering boom, the golden light was finally blasted away by the palm, leaving a long trail of blood in the fiery clouds. Li Yunxin had chased her for the time it took for half an incense stick to burn, And now, for the first time, he had seriously injured this sword cultivator who was protected by layers upon layers of supreme treasures. Like a kite with its string cut, golden light fell several tens of zhang before he regained consciousness. When he opened his eyes, he saw that Li Yunxin had arrived for the second time. How could he dare to take it head-on? He turned around and left. However, he still roared unwillingly, "What the hell did you do?" Li Yunxin laughed hideously in the flames. "I just drew two little people for your pig-like teammates to see." Little did the golden photon know that Li Yunxin had drawn a lifelike and miserable golden photon, in the middle of the violent and turbulent ocean of spiritual energy with his exquisite painting skills while she was talking and he was talking to her. Then he drew a fierce and ruthless Li Yunxin, who pulled the golden light back into the fiery clouds. When Ku Chanzi and the others suddenly saw this scene, they felt that golden light was at a disadvantage. Seeing that she was in such a miserable state, but she didn't remove the light shield of the glazed sword heart, they thought that the treasure was no longer under her control, so they attacked with a palm. The palm strike of a profound realm cultivator with all his strength was enough to seriously injure the golden light. At this critical moment of life and death, golden light finally changed her mind. She knew that it was no longer advisable to trap Li Yunxin in this sea of fire. Before he was refined to death, he would probably be beaten to death by him. Therefore, she made a series of hand gestures, trying to remove the golden light shield outside. The monstrous flames here would turn everything within a radius of dozens of li into ashes, but she couldn't care so much. How could the lives of hundreds of thousands of mortals be more important than her own life? However, when she made these hand gestures, golden light's heart sank to the bottom. The glazed sword heart was indeed in her body, but it didn't listen to her. How could this be? Because of this thought, she was distracted for a moment. As a result, the demon Li Yunxin attacked again. Golden light was about to dodge when Ku Chanzi's second palm strike arrived. This time, not only was her body injured, but even her snow mountain and ocean of chi were shaken. She paused and screamed in her heart that something was wrong, but it was useless. Wei River Dragon King's second heroic strike came, boom, boom, boom. The head of the 5 Skyline Sword sect was blasted dozens of meters away like a cannonball. The light of the 2 protective treasures on her flickered and was about to disappear. Golden light still wanted to make a final struggle. She happened to look forward and saw the outer edge of the golden light shield. Just as she was about to separate the thick fire clouds, the light shield was hit by 3 true realm cultivators at the same time. At this moment, the hatred and anger in the heart of the leader of the 5 Serpent Sword sect could almost compete with the monstrous flames inside the shield. She parted the fire clouds and finally saw the group of cultivators outside the shield. With unparalleled unwillingness, she only had time to ask, "Why did you harm me?" Then she was hit by Li Yunxin for the 3rd time. Her snow mountain and ocean of chi were seriously injured by her fellow disciples. Her spiritual power was very weak, and her protective treasure could barely hold on. Then she was hit by a powerful true realm demon like Li Yunxin 3 times with all his strength. Who else could withstand such an attack? Golden Light felt that she would die today. But she still had a thought in her heart. That was, even if Li Yunxin killed her today, there were still a group of idiots guarding outside. He would die eventually. This thought existed in her heart. Finally, she gathered her last breath and with the determination to die, she turned around and faced Li Yunxin's palms. She said her last words, "Demon. If you kill me you won't be well," but she didn't finish her words. Because Li Yunxin's palms didn't reach her chest. What Jean Light saw was a dragon son who had returned to the perfected master realm. His body was covered with dark golden scales, and a pair of golden sword lights shot up to the sky above his head. But this was not what struck her dumb. Instead, behind him, 36 shining golden and ferocious ghost kings of different shapes and forms surrounded the sky like a group of guardians behind a majestic king. What are these things? Chapter 425. His ocean of chi and mountain of snow, which were already on the verge of collapse, suddenly collapsed. The spiritual power in his body was cut off. The 2 protective magic treasures outside his body flashed and were about to disappear. At this moment, Li Yunxin stood high in the sky and shouted, "Withdraw!" The thick fiery clouds that filled the sky were instantly sucked into the bodies of the 36 ghost kings, as though they were being sucked in by a giant whale. The fire clouds disappeared so quickly that the inside of the shield was almost a vacuum. The soil on the ground had been refined into magma. Now it shot up to the sky with a boom like a volcanic eruption. Shocked and furious, Jin Guang no longer had the strength to support his injuries. He let out a breath from his chest and his body fell down like a fallen leaf. But he only fell halfway, and was blasted up to the sky by the airwaves when the magma gushed out. He really became a withered leaf. Who would have thought that the head of the Kenzo Wuyan sword sect, who was in the true state, would one day fall into such a miserable state? And it was under the gaze of nearly 100 cultivators outside the shield. Now that the fire clouds had dispersed, they could see the situation inside clearly. Ku Chanzi's face was as dark as still water. He didn't say a word. What happened today was the biggest humiliation he had suffered in the past 300 years. He had been tricked by a demon and hurt his fellow cultivator. Although he was only at the first level of the mystic state, his merciless kung fu was far beyond that of the true state. Even so, the blue veins on his arms were slightly bulging. It was easy to tell how much he hated Ku Chanzi. The 3 true state cultivators behind him also came to their senses. They hated Ku Chanzi more than anything else. They wanted to rush in and tear the demon into pieces. The cultivators in the transcendent state couldn't figure it out at the moment. They were a little confused. But no matter what, the fire clouds had been withdrawn. The boundary of the mystic light shield of the glazed sword heart had disappeared. The watery moonlight could pass through. If they didn't touch it with their hands, they wouldn't be able to see anything. The magma slowly cooled down. Although there were still red rivers flowing on the ground, the evaporated water vapor replaced a lot of the disappeared air, making the space inflate again. Cultivators eat wind and drink dew. In many aspects they were completely different from mortals. For example, they could use spiritual power to maintain the circulation of life force in their bodies, and they didn't need to rely on air like mortals. Just now, when Jin Guangzi and Li Yunxin were fighting in the fiery clouds, they had done exactly this. But right now, the golden light was heavily injured, and the spiritual energy in its body was almost exhausted. All that was left in the shield was scorching water vapor and poisonous gas rising from the magma. There was nothing for her to breathe in. Mortals would probably die in less than a quarter of an hour in such an environment. Gold Photon couldn't relax now either. She finally fell on a burning boulder. However, the clothes she was wearing were not ordinary, so they could slightly protect her body. However, when he pushed his hand against the ground and wanted to stand up, a burst of green smoke and the fragrance of meat immediately rose from where his palm touched the large rock. But in the end he stood up shakily and saw Li Yunxin floating down. Wei River Dragon King had retracted his god-devil incarnation and revealed his white robe. Just by looking at his appearance he had sword-like eyebrows, starry eyes, red lips and white teeth. Who would have thought that this handsome man was actually a ferocious great demon? The 36 golden ghost kings behind him silently and majestically lined up in the sky. Wherever Li Yunxin looked, they all looked in the same direction. Now that Li Yunxin was looking at Jin Guangzi, they also stared at Jin Guangzi. Their eyes were ferocious and terrifying, which made people feel like their guts were going to burst. Jin Guangzi struggled to stand up. She looked into the distance. There was a group of cultivators standing in the sky, their light-colored Taoist robes reflecting the moonlight. But now they couldn't break through the barrier of the glazed sword heart, so they could only watch from afar. Maybe if there was enough time, the profound realm cultivators could find a way. But now, Jin Guangzi looked at Li Yunxin and stared at him. But after only 2 breaths, she took a deep breath and let the pitiful air in this space flow into her lungs. Then she coughed violently. "You, what can you do to me?" She coughed 3 times and said, "You don't dare to kill me." Li Yunxin looked at her calmly. "Oh, what gave you such an illusion? You're here to ask for peace." Jin Guangzi's breathing became heavier, and her face gradually turned blue. This cultivator, or rather, the wandering soul, had probably forgotten what it felt like to be suffocated. Now that she experienced it again, it reminded her of the feeling of being human that she hadn't felt for a long time. But this body was still useful, and she also had treasured clothes on her, so she didn't want to get out of it. Before I came here, the 2 sages had already told me, "You have your own purpose, Li Yunxin." Jin Guangzi took a few deep breaths. "You're alone, but you don't want to be controlled by others. So you've suffered under the internal strife of the major forces, so you saw this opportunity and planned to let the demons and the profound gate both suffer losses." Jin Guangzi frowned slightly and her speech slowed down. It seemed that the feeling of suffocation made her brain a little chaotic, and at this moment she was trying hard to recall what the sage had said to her. "Long son, your brothers and sisters are eyeing you covetously, and the demon kings are also rejecting you as an alien. You can't get along with them. What about the profound gate? You don't like them even more, and they have a grudge against you. So, take advantage of this battle. You'll be a double-sided spy, not only to leak information to the demons, but also to the profound gate so that both sides suffer losses and the world is in chaos. Only then will you have a chance to breathe. Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows. Oh? That makes sense. When he landed, he was dozens of feet away from Jin Guangxi, and he was standing on a slightly cold piece of solidified rock. Now that he had only talked for a short while, a few more pieces had also become cold. He slowly jumped and walked towards Jin Guangxi. It looked like the flowing magma was a clear and shallow stream under the bright summer sun, and he was walking on the blue stone between the streams to avoid the water, calm and leisurely. Jin Guangxi stared at him. As for our Freemasonry, Li Yunxin, you should be on the same side as us. We are not those stupid cultivators, nor are we those stupid secular people. It is the wisest choice for you to stand with us. You have to know. She was talking while looking at Li Yunxin. But when she saw his expression, it had never changed. He was like a real mortal walking between the streams. His eyes and attention were focused on the lava at the soles of his feet. He didn't listen to those words just now, so she couldn't continue. A strong sense of uneasiness surged in her heart again. Jin Guangxi took a step back slightly. Li Yunxin, if you kill me you won't live either. Outside, it is Ku Chanzi, a cultivator of the profound realm. There are also 3 cultivators of the true realm and nearly 100 transformations. If you kill me you won't be able to leave, you will die. I can only mediate for you if I am still alive. I am the envoy sent by the sage from Mount Cloud. They will not disobey me. But Li Yunxin still didn't speak. After a full 3 breaths, he walked to the rock where Jin Guangxi was standing, 3 steps away from her. Jin Guangxi subconsciously took a step back and almost fell. You think about it, you are a smart person. Li Yunxin stared at her for a while and snorted in a low voice. When you wanted to kill me just now, you didn't think about me so thoroughly. But, Jin Guangxi, aren't you curious why this glazed sword heart doesn't listen to your command? Jin Guangxi was stunned, opened her mouth and inhaled the extremely thin air. You. Her thoughts were in a mess. But she felt that this seemed to mean that Li Yunxin was indeed going to accept her proposal. At least he was willing to talk. Then, how did you do it? Li Yunxin let out a light breath, turned his head and narrowed his eyes, and looked at the group of cultivators in the distance. Do you know the origin of this glazed sword heart? Glazed sword heart was originally the most precious treasure of Kenzo. Jin Guangxi had cultivated with it for decades, and no one in the entire Kenzo knew this treasure better than she did. But now, a demon asked if she knew its origin. But Jin Guangxi gritted her teeth. This is the Sword Saint's treasure. Li Yunxin waited for a while. Seeing that she didn't say anything more, he sneered, it is the treasure of the 213th Sword Saint of Kenzo, Pei Yunjin. At that time, there were a total of 36 powerful ghost kings in the world. He said as he looked at Jin Guangxi, Sword Saint Pei Yunjin ran from Mount Cloud to the ground, and subdued the 36 ghost kings. After subduing them, it was difficult to kill them, so he refined them into a treasure, this glazed sword heart. This thing looks dazzling. In reality, it is a sealed evil ghost. According to Pei Yunjin, he was worried that his descendants would accidentally release the evil ghost and cause chaos in the world again, so he hid an even more exquisite method to control this treasure in his head. The method he left on Mount Cloud can only unleash 10% of this treasure's power. I thought about it. No wonder you, a mere true state, could cultivate with this Sword Saint's treasure. So you only cultivated at the initial stage. Jin Guangxi frowned. You mean? Li Yunxin laughed. I obtained the true method. So now this glazed sword heart is in my hands, not yours. Your original 36 golden light swords were actually transformed from these 36 ghosts. When you were in Changji town, you used 36 of your disciples as sword spirits. Didn't you think of this? Jin Guangxi was stunned for a while and said again. Then Pei Yunjin. Li Yunxin stopped smiling and looked at her seriously. He looked at her seriously. Meng. Chapter 426. Gold Photon was silent for a while. But he's just a mortal now, a useless person. You didn't even dare to release him just now. Li Yunxin interrupted her. I wasn't talking to him just now. He's not in my sleeve either. Gold Photon was stunned. Then she heard Li Yunxin continue, but you killed his precious baby. And tortured him to death. Do you know what he did after you ran away that day? Li Yunxin's lips curled into a faint smile as he stared at Gold Photon with great interest. He threw this glazed sword core to me. He said that this would be my thanks for saving his two darlings. Later, on the way to Little Rock Canyon, he passed the formula to me. When we reached the top of Little Rock Canyon, he said, "If I kill you, he will tell me everything he knows, everything about the Shen men. So you see, you've provoked a big shot." The golden photon took another step back. At this moment, her body was extremely weak. His foot landed on a small pebble, causing his ankle to buckle and his whole body to fall. She hurriedly stretched out her hand to support herself on the ground. So she didn't fall awkwardly but knelt on the ground. Scorching hot air and thick poisonous fog filled her chest. She forced herself to stay awake and looked up at Li Yunxin. "He knows. Cloud Mountain. The two saints also know. If you stay with us, you'll get more than what he can give you." Li Yunxin looked down at her. "But I've already promised him." Gold Photon struggled to squeeze out a cold smile. "Don't tell me you're someone who keeps his promises?" Li Yunxin blinked her eyes and thought about it seriously. She seemed to have a sudden realization. "Oh, what you said makes sense. I'm not that kind of person." So Gold Photon hurriedly said, "If that's the case." However, the next moment, Li Yunxin's expression suddenly changed. He kicked Jin Guangwen's face and sent her flying 2 meters away. He gritted his teeth and said, "But I'm a petty person." As he spoke, he strode forward and kicked her in the chest again, causing her to flip over again. "Do you still remember what I told you that day?" Li Yunxin suddenly acted violently. The cultivators who were watching from afar immediately shouted. The voice came from afar, but it was full of energy, like thunder rolling through the clouds. "Demons. If you dare to hurt the Golden Light Sect leader, you will not be able to live past tonight." However, Li Yunxin turned a deaf ear to her. Once again he raised his foot and stomped on Jin Guangwen's head, pressing her face firmly into the boiling lava. The sword cultivator struggled with all his might, like a dying fish. However, her body was weak, so how could she struggle free? Li Yunxin continued to curse. "When we were in Changji town, you used my black cat demon to threaten me. Do you still remember what I said? Don't you dare touch a hair of hers. Within 7 days I will destroy your entire sect. If you dare to touch a finger of hers within a month, your 4 sects will all die. Do you think I am joking?" After he shouted these words, Jin Guangwen on the ground stopped moving. When the cultivators in the sky saw this scene, they were truly stunned. This demon. He actually dared to kill a true realm cultivator in front of them, at the entrance of the Celestial Sect of Wonders camp. But in the next moment they saw an even more shocking scene. The demon Li Yunxin seemed to be stunned. He didn't seem to have expected that the golden photon would die before he could finish speaking. He suddenly became even angrier. With a turn of his palm, a misty green iron chain appeared in his palm. At this moment, the cultivators all opened their heavenly eyes. They saw Jin Guangwen's soul stand up from the corpse in a daze for a moment. After the physical body died, the soul would come out of the body with a slight delay. The soul attached to Jin Guangwen's body was a wandering soul of the Freemasonry, which was far more alert than ordinary souls. But even so, it wasn't as fast as Li Yunxin's method. He shook the iron chain and whipped Jin Guangwen's soul like he was whipping an animal. He cursed. "Get back. Do I want you to die?" All the cultivators were shocked. They didn't know what Li Yunxin was doing. Could it be that he didn't want to kill her, but now that he saw her die, he was afraid that the Xianmen would take revenge on him, and panicked. His iron chain was the chain of a young world judge. It was even more magical than the treasures left behind by the saints. And now he whipped it with hatred, and actually temporarily pulled back the soul that had left his body. Jin Guangwen's body suddenly twitched. Then he let out a suffocating gasp and opened his eyes again. All the cultivators felt slightly relieved. The true realm Taoist hurriedly shouted, "Demon, maybe you can be forgiven for repentance. Quickly send Master Jin Guangzi out of the restrictive spell, maybe." Before he could finish, he saw Li Yunxin pick up Jin Guangwen, who had temporarily recovered her soul, and put her on the ground. Then he took a step closer and stared into her eyes. "I didn't kill you, so how dare you die? If you want to die, you should die in my hands." After he said that, before Jin Guangwen could say anything, before those cultivators could say anything, his palm suddenly chopped. Jin Guangwen's head instantly turned into a broken watermelon, exploding into a pool of red and white paste. This time, the wandering soul left the body and was about to escape immediately, but it was immediately tied up by the iron chain in Li Yunxin's palm. He didn't care what those Taoists were yelling about. Clouds rose between the scales and thunder and fire roared above the sky. Just like when he killed Qing Liang in the city of Wei, he used 49 bolts of heavenly thunder in one breath to blast this wandering soul into pieces. Only when the smoke on the ground dispersed and the flying ash of Golden Light's fleshly body also dispersed did the cultivators outside the shield of profound light regain their wits. This fiendish demon. One of the true stage cultivators muttered to himself. However, he simply did not know what to say. Not only did he kill a sword faction sect master right before their eyes, he also killed a sword faction sect master. After she died, he even forced her soul back into her body and killed her again just because he said, "I didn't kill you, so how would you dare to die?" How cruel and arrogant was this? If Ku Chanzi's face was as gloomy as water before, it was now dead water. His anger was written all over his face and the veins on the back of his hands. But now, the anger had been retracted from his flesh and blood to his bones. This demon was arrogant and unreasonable. His savagery and cunning were rarely seen in this world. If he could not be killed here tonight, he would definitely become a huge threat in the future. Chapter 427. So, he waved his hand and told the cultivators behind him to stop talking. Then he stared at Li Yunxin, who was standing inside the mystic light shield. They were half a mile away from each other. Mortals wouldn't be able to see clearly from such a distance. However, cultivators and demons all had extraordinary eyesight. At such a distance, they could even see the expressions on each other's faces. Ku Chanzi's anger was as heavy as a snow-capped mountain. He restrained the anger and disgust in his heart and made his voice steady and clear. "Demon Li Yunxin, what a good demon. What a vicious and perverse heart you have. You killed the Golden Light and destroyed her soul, so you do have some skills. But have you ever thought about how you're going to get out of here tonight?" His voice reached Li Yunxin's ears clearly. However, when Li Yunxin heard this, he only turned his head and looked at Ku Chanzi. The cultivators were still covered with moonlight. From a distance they looked like small lamps hanging in the sky. Then he shook his head, smiled, turned his face away, and sat down on the ground. All the cultivators could see his smile clearly. It was a smile mixed with contempt and pity. This demon, a mere true realm demon, was surrounded by so many people, but he still dared to act like this? What did he despise? What did he pity? The true realm cultivators and the transcendent realm cultivators were immediately provoked by his smile, and they all glared at him. But Ku Chanzi waved his hand again. After a moment of silence he said, "Who are you waiting for? Don't you think I'm qualified to talk to you?" A master of the heavenly abode of Daotong who was in the mysterious realm of Shi was talking to a true realm demon like this, which was rare in the world. He was being courteous to the wise, if it could be said so. However, this demon Li Yunxin sighed after a full 15 minutes of silence and turned his face to look at him from a distance. "Whether I'm qualified or not is another matter. But I'm not talking to you because I'm not looking for you." Hearing this, the cultivators were in an uproar. How dare this demon speak so arrogantly? However, Li Yunxin treated them as background noise and continued, "I think you are a decent cultivator. Don't you know what happened in your Dao sect?" A demon was talking nonsense about the mystic gate. After hearing his words, the group of cultivators in the state of the transcendent lost their cool and started cursing loudly again. However, Ku Chanzi's expression changed slightly, and he waved his hand to stop them. After pondering for a while, he suddenly changed his tone. "So, you really didn't come here to provoke me?" Li Yunxin was not stunned by his words, but the other cultivators were stunned. This meant that Ku Chanzi, the profound realm Taoist master, had admitted that what Li Yunxin had said was true. Something had indeed gone wrong in the Taoist sect. For a moment, everyone was speechless and didn't know what to say. Ku Chanzi pondered for a moment and shook his head slightly. "The matters of our profound sect are naturally predestined or predestined. Even if something happens, it's not up to you, a demon, to say anything. Perhaps you are not here to seek death. But..." His expression became serious. "Since you have schemed against me and accidentally hurt a fellow Taoist, you have formed an ill-fated relationship with me. It was impossible for this ill-fated relationship to be left unresolved. Li Yunxin, if you put away your magic treasure and get out of this restriction, I can guarantee that only you and I will end this matter. If you don't die in my hands tonight, I won't pursue this matter anymore." After he said this, the group of cultivators behind him started to shout. It was nothing more than meaningless nonsense like, "Why are you talking about morality with this evil demon? How can the Golden Light sect master die in vain? Sect master, you must not do this." After shouting like this for a while, Li Yunxin laughed coldly from inside the shield. "Ha! Ah, do you think I am stupid? A profound realm Taoist is guarding outside and I still want to go out and fight with you alone? Am I tired of living? I won't go out. What can you do to me? Golden Light Sect had formed a mysterious light shield in the glazed sword heart, and Ku Chanzi couldn't break it for a while. Now, Li Yunxin continued to use this shield, and the method he used was different from Golden Light Sect's. Sword Saint Yu Ming was no longer the sword saint who cared about the world. For the sake of his loved ones, he had a kind of, after I die, I don't care about the flood, attitude. Therefore he wasn't afraid of the 36 ghosts wreaking havoc in the world, or something like that, and only passed the true method to Li Yunxin. How could Li Yunxin be easy to deal with? He directly released all 36 ghost kings. These 36 ghost kings had already been mostly refined by Sword Saint Pei Yun. Their minds were muddled and they were like loyal dogs that recognized their master. Now that they were free and only recognized Li Yunxin as their master, it could be considered as the power of faith from the Ghost Kings in the true realm. This power allowed him to advance further in the Sea of Fire and return to the realm of perfected Taoist master. Therefore, this mystic light barrier was no longer the work of a cultivator or a demon. Instead, it was used by the 36 Ghost Kings. In terms of essence and power, it was far more powerful than the Golden Light. If Ku Chanzi wanted to break it, it would be no different from a head-on confrontation with the former Sword Saint Pei Yunjin. How could he win? Now that Li Yunxin was acting like a rascal, the cultivators outside were so angry that they scolded him loudly. But Ku Chanzi just smiled coldly, waved his big sleeve and took out a thin cloud. It was none other than a magical artifact for flight. He took the 100 or so cultivators up and sat cross-legged. It seemed he had made up his mind to guard Li Yunxin here. The true realm cultivator behind him frowned. Sect leader, with your honorable status, are you really going to sit here with this demon? Why doesn't he dare to come out? Ku Chanzi softly said, N. He paused for a while and said in a low voice, this golden light shield is very powerful. It can almost isolate heaven and earth and form a space of its own. You saw it just now, the spiritual energy inside the shield is surging, and the fire waves are monstrous but we can't feel anything outside. Now this Li Yunxin. When he said this he couldn't help but snort, because he saw Li Yunxin searching the ground and the place where Golden Light had died. Obviously, he was looking for the treasure she had left behind. This Li Yunxin is hiding inside so we can't do anything to him. But since he's isolated it, there's no life force inside. Demons and cultivators can rely on spiritual energy to live. But now, the life force inside is thin, and the spiritual energy inside is also limited. He's a demon, not a celestial. If his spiritual energy is exhausted after a night, he'll have to use the demonic energy of his snow mountain and ocean of chi. If he really doesn't come out, I'll meditate here and watch him turn himself into a human jerky. After saying this he didn't say anything else and closed his eyes slightly. That true realm cultivator calmed down a little. It was common for profound realm Taoists to meditate for a year or so. If he really wanted to turn Li Yunxin into a human jerky, it wouldn't be an exaggeration. Moreover, it wouldn't take a year or so. In such a small space the spiritual energy would be exhausted in a few hours. If he stayed any longer he would only become weaker and weaker. At that time this Li Yunxin would either have to wait for death or he would have to do something else. So he sat on the cloud, closed his eyes and meditated. For a moment all was quiet. Of course this only referred to the inside of the golden light shield. In the thick poisonous smoke and water vapor, Li Yunxin picked up all the treasures left by golden light, and the harvest was quite plentiful. It was just that the feeling inside this shield was really not good. Even though his body was strong, the blood in his body seemed to be boiling, and his temples throbbed. It was as if there was a stove slowly cooking inside his body, and he was about to burst. The vitality that Ku Chanzi had mentioned was oxygen, or air, for him. This shield enclosed a large area of underground land. Now that the fire clouds inside had been absorbed into the bodies of the 36 ghost kings, it was as if this place had suddenly become a vacuum. The water in the lava would immediately be vaporized, and the gas in the soil would also be drawn out. However, compared to such a vast space, it was like trying to put out a cart of firewood with a cup of water. If a mortal stayed inside he would lose consciousness after about 10 breaths and then die. But, after picking up those treasures, Li Yunxin sat down cross-legged again. He also meditated. After sitting like this for about a quarter of an hour, he heard someone whisper, "What are you doing?" Although the words were a little distorted. But he could tell that it was none other than Su Sheng. Li Yunxin closed his eyes and said, "Sit." A thumb-sized little person slowly walked out of his sleeve. using his clothes to cover his figure so that the cultivator in the sky wouldn't see him. Sit? Then what? At this moment, his voice was full of energy, not as depressed as before. It seemed that Li Yunxin had used some means to get him out of his misery. Li Yunxin narrowed his eyes and looked down at him. How would I know? Su Xing seemed to be stunned. Standing in the folds of his sleeve, he blinked his eyes. What do you mean I don't know? Then he crawled out of the folds on his hands and feet as if he could speak more clearly this way. You killed the head of a sword sect at their doorstep, and now you say, you haven't thought about what to do next? With Li Yunxin's temperament, she wasn't suited for meditation. At this time he reluctantly sat for a while, but now he was annoyed by this little Su Sheng. He simply sighed and opened his eyes. I originally planned to come here to check out the situation. I would first find an excuse to ensure my safety, then sneak into Daotong or Kenzo, explain my purpose, and then do the next thing. Killing Jean Daisy was indeed in my plan. But not now, during or after the war, but she suddenly jumped out to seek death tonight. Is it my fault? Su Xing was speechless by his words. After a long time he said, I thought you had a thorough plan. But it turned out to be such a thorough plan? You killed her today just because you wanted to? Sigh, I often heard people say that you have a meticulous plan. Li Yunxin snorted disdainfully. Thorough? Meticulous plan? Who can guarantee that there are no mistakes in every step of my plan? Everything has to be done according to the situation. If I can predict everything, why would I need to cultivate? I should just become a celestial. Chapter 428. As for you. He pointed at Su Sheng. I advise you to control your emotions. The first time, I drew out another you in your subconscious and temporarily suppressed that miserable you. Then the you I drew out was pulled back again. Now I've drawn out another you, but I'm not the first you have drawn out. The reason why I'm not willing to do this is that I'm actually inducing you to have a split personality. Split personality, do you understand? Su Xing frowned. What? Li Yunxin sighed. In short, there are two other you hiding in your head right now. If this you is suppressed again and you still want me to help you pass the tribulation, I'll draw out a fourth you. This is playing with fire. You're a sage with strong spiritual power, but I don't know where your limit is. Maybe 5 or 6, maybe 50 or 60. But he looked helpless and didn't know what to say. He could only spread his hands. You control your emotions, okay, my friend? Su Xing didn't know what split personality was, but judging from Li Yunxin's rare serious tone, he knew that he wasn't lying. So he took a few deep breaths and said, Sigh. I'll do as you say. But next, just wait. Li Yunxin raised her eyes and looked into the distance. From the time he fought with the golden photon until now, only a very short time had passed, not even half an hour. But the camp of the coalition army of the secular dynasties was already in chaos. The immortals didn't like these mortals very much. Although the two sides weren't far apart, they didn't bother to tell them many things. Perhaps it was because they considered that the opponent this time was a demon. In the face of such a magical enemy, many of the methods of the secular people were useless, including the methods of secrecy. So most people didn't know what was going on tonight. When the ignorant mortals saw such a scene and momentum, they only thought that the demons were invading. For a moment, more than 100,000 people panicked, and the camp was about to be overturned by the army. However, he didn't know that this was just a true state fiendish demon and a true state cultivator. If it was really a large-scale invasion, 99% of them wouldn't even be able to see the appearance of the demon, and they would probably die. The flames on the campsite gradually merged into one. Li Yunxin continued, Perhaps the Freemasons are coming. Jean Guangxi said that their two sages know what I'm thinking and are willing to accept me, so they won't let me die here in vain. Su Xing wanted to say something but hesitated. But in the end he couldn't help but say, What if he doesn't come? At this point, his tone did not sound like reproach or complaint, but pure curiosity. He was very curious. What kind of attitude would this sinister and cunning demon have when he fell into such a situation because of a moment of impulse? He reincarnated to cultivate the 7 emotions and 6 sensory pleasures and met many interesting people. However, it was rare to see someone like Li Yunxin. Li Yunxin thought about it. With a faint smile, he said, Then you can only die. Su Xing furrowed his brows in confusion. Die. The kind of death you're thinking of? Li Yunxin said lightly. Everyone has to die. Su Xing paused for a moment. Die tonight? Here. Looking at his expression and tone, Li Yunxin suddenly burst out laughing. Take a look, take a look. Even someone like you can't jump out of this limitation. What's so surprising about me dying here tonight? Is there anyone who doesn't die? I know what you're thinking. Everyone thinks they're the main character. Everyone thinks they'll have good luck. Almost everyone before doing something can't help but think of a good result and not a bad one. For example, those Qing soldiers escorting the Red Earth into the rolling mountains thought, what will happen after this trip? They always felt that their chances of survival were high. That Jin Guangxi brought a body full of magical treasures. He knew I would be difficult to deal with, but he also thought about what would happen after I killed that Li Yunxin. He didn't think about what would happen if he died, including this Ku Chanzi. He raised his hand and pointed at the sky. Right now he's also thinking about what will happen after he kills me. Everyone, from their own point of view, feels that a lot of luck is on their side. But the problem is, if fate is a river and people's subjective emotions and external factors are the water in the surging river, if you jump out of the river and look down on it, you will find that everyone has a lot of chances of dying. Dying 10 years ago is not strange. Dying a year ago is not strange. Dying tonight is also not strange. If everyone thinks, I can't die here, then they really won't die. How could there be so many dead people in the world? That's why I said to Jin Guangxi earlier that when it comes to strategy, wandering souls like her have a natural flaw. She thinks too much of herself. If she can't even let go of her own life and death and thinks, what will happen if I die, at every step, how can she do anything good? This is the so-called bystanders see the most clearly. So if I die tonight, what's so hard to accept? If he said these words to people in the secular world, they would probably think that it was long and boring, full of irrelevant principles. However, when Su Sheng heard it, he was stunned for a moment. After being stunned for a while, he suddenly turned his head to look at Li Yunxin, as if he recognized him for the first time. There's actually someone like you? Naturally, he knew that people weren't the main characters that they thought they were. But even the most objective person's thoughts and ideas were limited to their own physical bodies. Because of this, they would always be affected by this physical body. They couldn't be objective to themselves like they were to others. You stand in a certain place, facing a row of strange-looking people. Although they have different shapes, you know that there is a most fundamental difference between you and them. This difference is far greater than any difference between them. They are not you. But now, listening to Li Yunxin's words and thinking about the things he did in the past, Su Sheng vaguely understood what kind of attitude he had toward himself and the world. Li Yunxin seemed to never take himself too seriously. Or in other words, in his eyes, the body that he lived in was almost no different from other people. The only difference was that his body was easier to control and was more convenient to control. Because of this, just like what he said to Jin Guangxi before and just said to himself, when he did things he was cruel to himself. He rarely thought about whether it was safe for him to do this. What he prioritized was whether it was more likely to succeed by doing this. There was an essential difference between the two. Because of this, he seemed to be able to accept his death calmly tonight, as if it was not him who died, but one of those cultivators or even many mortals. Su Sheng used to be a sage. He reincarnated to cultivate the 7 emotions and 6 desires, and he didn't have much recognition and sense of belonging to the body he transformed into. Therefore, in Dongting, Su Weng could talk about his death bluntly without any reluctance. But even with the personal ability of a sage, he felt that he couldn't be as cold and objective as Li Yunxin. This Li Yunxin. Who on earth was he before? Heaven and earth are heartless. They treat all living things like straw dogs. Su Sheng thought for a while in shock and finally murmured these 2 sentences. In the past, I once discussed with the art saint about the supreme oblivion. She said these 2 sentences. I didn't understand it at that time. I didn't understand it before today. Now after listening to your words, Li Yunxin, I finally understand the meaning of your words. Do you compare yourself to the world? The real supreme indifference. Is it another meaning? Li Yunxin was a little surprised. Who would have thought that a few words of his out of the blue would cause this saint to sigh with emotion? Maybe this guy recultivated the emotions and desires so he was more sensitive than ordinary people. But he didn't want to let Su Sheng continue to think. It had been like this since ancient times. As long as people began to think about philosophical issues such as their own existence and value, they were always easy to get into a dead end and make themselves unhappy. He worked hard to pull out the 3rd Su Sheng from his subconscious and asked about the spell of the immortal bone. He didn't want to make Su Sheng feel sleepy again, so he had to make the 4th Su Sheng. This kind of thing. The more he did, the more difficult it would be. Therefore, he clapped his hands and interrupted Su Sheng's thoughts. It's boring to wait. I have something to ask you. Su Sheng was still absent-minded after saying this. Li Yunxin snapped his fingers in his ear. Su Sheng was now a little person the size of a thumb. The sound of Li Yunxin's fingers was more than a thunder to him. He fell down and slid into the folds of the big sleeve. He shouted angrily, I got to the key point. You have a lot of time to study. I will send you away before I die. But I want to ask you another question. It's more important. He took a light breath, thought for a while and said casually, You used to be a saint, so you know more about the Tao than me. Then, for example, if I cultivate the divine power of the soul transforming into the real body. If I transform into a real body and my main body dies, will my real body also die or will it live alone? Su Sheng was stunned. Just for this? Didn't your previous teachers teach you? Li Yunxin pouted, I don't have any teachers at the moment. I've taught myself for a long time. Su Sheng opened his mouth. He seemed to want to exclaim or feel emotional. But in the end he shook his head. Fine. Okay, the matter of the soul transforming into the real body. Let me put it this way of calling it is actually wrong. There is only one part of the soul and it can't be split up. For example, after a person dies, his soul is damaged and he becomes a ghost with dementia. This can be seen. So, the soul transforming into the real body is actually not really splitting the soul. It's just a projection. You should have cultivated the Shenting true solution. Li Yunxin shook his head. No. Su Sheng stared blankly for a moment before saying, All right. Then you must have cultivated the golden core connection contract. Li Yunxin shook his head. No. Su Sheng frowned. You didn't cultivate either of these? Then what about the Deshang book, Zhuang Mirofa, and Ziwei Venerable Scriptures? Li Yunxin spread his hands. I have heard of them. Su Sheng was stunned for a full 3 breaths. Then he said, You didn't cultivate any of these things but you went to learn the Tao. You didn't go mad and die early, that's that's why I'm so pitiful. Li Yunxin smiled, I'm just lucky. Along with a bit of intelligence. Su Sheng raised his head and looked at him, shaking his head several times. Who knew if he was exclaiming that this person was a genius, or that his luck was off the charts, or that he wasted his talent. After a while he sighed, Okay, I'll say it plainly. A portion of the soul is merged into your body. The other portion is hidden in the various meridians and acupoints. It was impossible for a part of this thing to be dissolved. The so-called true body is actually an illusion of a new body, meridians and acupoints. The source and foundation of this thing is still the main body. As long as the main body isn't destroyed, this incarnation is no different from the main body. This is also why when the incarnation is destroyed, the main body will suffer heavy injuries. This heavy injury isn't because you lost a portion of your soul. If you really lost a portion of your soul, you would have long become stupid. Instead, it is equivalent to the enemy's spiritual energy passing through your body, meridians and acupoints, projecting onto your main body. From this, you should know that the main body is the trunk, the foundation. The incarnation is like the branches and leaves. If the main body is destroyed, it is like the trunk and foundation being cut off. The incarnation won't work. When Li Yunxin heard him say all this, his expression was really calm, like there wasn't much novelty in it. It was like he already knew these things, and was only seeking confirmation from the most authoritative person in the world. When he said this, he continued, But if the trunk falls, the branches and leaves can still live for some time. Su Sheng smiled. You want to say that if the main body is destroyed, the split incarnation can still live for some time. That is indeed the case. However, this situation is also very rare. Under the true realm, one can't practice this divine ability, so it doesn't matter whether the incarnation is or not. Above the true realm, the body is already extremely strong. Ordinary small injuries aren't enough to kill through cutting the body, either exploding the entire body, or like you killed this golden light, crushing the head. But the head is the master of the 100 acupoints. Once the heavy injury leads to death, the acupoints will be greatly damaged, and the soul will also be heavily injured. Even if the body is still intact, the soul won't be able to stay for long. The split incarnation naturally only has the time to snap a finger. Li Yunxin faintly said, Oh. Su Sheng didn't say anything. He stared at him for a while, then suddenly said, But tonight you aren't afraid of death, because there is indeed a way to survive. Isn't that right? Without hesitation, Li Yunxin giggled, Yes. He stretched his body and said, It's so boring to sit through the long night. Do you want this? As he said this, he flipped his palm and took out a wine pot. It was a silver pot, exactly the same as the one he crushed and threw to the wine shop owner outside the camp. It was small and exquisite, and there were 3 young characters on the base, Mu Nanchun. It was obvious that the wine in the pot was Mu Nanchun's unique wine. Chapter 429. Su Sheng's mind was clear at the moment. He didn't seem to want to drink, so he shook his head. Li Yunxin didn't try to persuade him either. He used one finger to stir the wine in the pot, turning it into a silver thread and poured it into his mouth. He drank about half of it in one breath before putting it down. His expression was a bit gloomy. Alas, this wine is old Lu's favorite. Su Sheng listened to his words, frowned slightly and looked at him for a while. He felt that the sudden loneliness on his face was real. He said, "I know about your old Lu. But I also heard, after you were attacked on Mount June. After he was captured, he confessed about your 2 protectors. Those 2 protectors have the fate of imparting techniques to you so they can be considered your disciples. Don't you hate them?" Li Yunxin put down the wine pot, one arm behind him, the other on his knees. He looked up at the sky for a while and sighed. "When I first met him, he was very timid. But later I slowly realized that his courage is hidden in his bones. Since that's the case, he doesn't have the courage. If he has the courage, he will be bigger and more ruthless than anyone else." After saying these words, he was silent for a while. Then he looked down at Su Sheng and said seriously, "If it were me, I would do the same." Su Sheng frowned. "Confess about your 2 disciples, to save your own life?" Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head. He confessed them not for his own life but for mine. Su Sheng, who had recultivated the 7 emotions and 6 sensory pleasures, had an unusual curiosity about all kinds of strange emotions in the world. Now that he heard Li Yunxin's words, his interest was piqued. "What do you mean?" Li Yunxin hesitated for a while and looked at him. Su Sheng was slightly surprised, then he understood and sneered. "Just now, when your life was hanging by a thread in the fire cloud, when you asked me about the immortal's curse, you didn't guard against me, but now you're wary?" Li Yunxin smiled. "Fine. I mean, the situation that day. When he and I were ambushed, we were completely defenseless. I'm a weak person and I've lived in fear until now. It's only because many people didn't care about me in the beginning, and I could always get more information. That's why the situation at that time was extremely dangerous. If I wasn't careful, I would have really died. I understand this, and so does Lu Gongzan. So in the end, I couldn't protect him, and he borrowed my dragon palace to escape. I couldn't take him away either. If I take him with me, he will be a burden. There is a burden. Either he will be killed by the cultivator who is chasing me, or he will be killed by the cultivator who is chasing me. With his realm, if he gets involved in that kind of thing, there's no way he can survive. So there's only one choice: he stays there. Perhaps there's a 10% chance of survival. Those cultivators, they've all become demons. You can say that he's cold or stubborn. He might have a way out if he doesn't play by the rules. So he didn't hesitate to give up those 2. The people from Shenmen went to take a look, and what he said was true, so they killed them. They knew this was his proof of allegiance. You see, he has no backbone and he's afraid of death. He immediately changes sides when things go wrong. Isn't that how people who work with demons should behave? In fact, by doing this, sacrificing those 2 demons, his chance of survival is very slim. If it's for himself, he won't do such a thing. However, if it's for me... Li Yunxin paused, took a deep breath and exhaled a white mist. If it's for me, this old guy can probably slaughter everyone in the world. Not to mention those 2 demons. He knows that I'm in such a dangerous situation. Any hope, any help is extremely precious to me, and I have to try at all costs. He also knows that I like to play chess. So he treats himself as a chess piece. If he wants to live, even if he doesn't know how far he can live, whether he can see me again and whether he can help me again, he has to survive first. In fact, I did a lot of things like this. Regardless of whether it's useful or not, as long as I feel that it's possible, I'll casually make a move. Perhaps it'll come in handy at some point. So, I used the lives of those 2 demons and my own life to gamble. Hearing this, Su Sheng frowned. Did you think of all this yourself? How can you be sure that he really thinks so? Li Yunxin raised the wine pot and drank the remaining half-pot of wine in one gulp. He let out a long breath and looked at Su Sheng from the corner of his eyes. Otherwise, how do you think I know that golden light brought a Dao tool to Mount Chuyun? Su Sheng was surprised. Could it be? Li Yunxin put his finger on his lips and shushed him. Are you afraid that the people outside can't hear you? Su Xing shut his mouth. But in the end he couldn't hold it back and said, however, Golden Light severely injured your black cat demon, and you wanted to kill her to vent your anger. This Lu Gongzan gave up 2 of your generals. What do you want? Li Yunxin slowly squeezed the empty silver pot in his hand into a small ball, and was silent for a while. I don't know. This kind of thing. Su Xing sighed. I really want to see with my own eyes what you'll say to him after you see him, and how you'll deal with him. This kind of thing is really a rare and strange sight. My heart is itching to hear this. Li Yunxin was stunned, and then he smashed the silver pot in his hand. You're AF * king pervert, aren't you? He smashed it to the side and Su Xing was able to avoid it in time. He didn't find it strange. Instead, there seemed to be some kind of subtle atmosphere slowly spreading between the two of them. One was a former saint, who had dispersed his cultivation to recultivate. The other was a peerless demon who had always been lonely. But tonight, these two people who were supposed to be irreconcilable enemies, were chatting and laughing under the moonlight. Who knew how long such a time would last? And so, almost an hour had passed. The Allied army's campsite that was originally far away was ablaze, as if it was on fire. But now the fire was getting smaller, the human voices were also gradually quieting, and the situation seemed to be under control. Ku Chanzi and the True State cultivators had profound cultivation base. But slowly, some of the cultivators in the place of the outer fringe started to feel resentful. That demon had tortured and killed a Kenzo cultivator in front of them. But now he was sitting leisurely in the prohibition spell and he would even laugh occasionally. How arrogant and unreasonable was he? But they could only watch from here. The more they watched, the angrier they were. Therefore some people stood up and sat quietly impatiently. Some people did this and some people followed suit. In the end, the cultivators in the place of the outer fringe gathered in groups of 2s and 3s, and discussed in low voices. They thought that such a passive wait had really lowered the Schwammen's morale. Moreover, the great war with the demon was imminent. If the demon attacked tomorrow, wouldn't this long sun be able to escape? He was obviously right in front of them, but he had escaped in vain. This kind of thing, who could endure it? But just as the crowd was getting excited, a sharp-eyed person suddenly pointed to the northwest horizon and said, Someone's coming. For a moment, dozens of divine senses were cast in that direction. The black tower that the cultivators built at the front line was originally at the northeast of this place. Obviously, the person who came was not a visitor from the Black Tower. The northwest was the direction of Cloud Mountain. But even so, these cultivators in the place of the outer fringe frowned slightly. There seemed to be a trace of doubt in their expressions. This was because the cultivators of Daotong and Kenzo, although their main cultivation methods were different, their spiritual power and aura were extremely similar. In the words of the Xianmen, it was possessing a noble and righteous aura in one's chest. But the person who came did not purposely conceal her aura. Instead, she purposely released it as if she was afraid that someone would harm her without distinguishing between friend and foe. But the problem was, even so, his aura was still very puzzling. There was some noble aura of the Xianmen, but there was also some demonic aura. These cultivators in the place of the outer fringe were puzzled, so they looked at the 4 connoisseurs who were still sitting quietly. Ku Chanzi and the 3 True State cultivators did not have any strange expressions, so they were slightly relieved. After waiting for the time it takes for half an incense stick to burn, they could see the appearance of the person who came from the faraway horizon. Then they were slightly surprised. The person who came was a female cultivator, but she did not wear a Taoist robe. Instead, she wore a red and green robe. Ordinary people would always look tacky if they wore red and green. However, this person who came from afar wore the red and green with liveliness, like the green leaves in midsummer contrasting with the blooming red flowers. Not only was there liveliness, but there was also a hint of enchantment. The instrument she was sitting on was not just any other instrument, it was a red-crowned white crane. The crane spread its huge wings and flew over slowly. The woman's robe also fluttered in the wind. Coupled with the water-like moonlight, she truly looked like a fairy that had descended to the mortal world. The female cultivator quickly arrived outside the inhibition formation, and was only a stone's throw away from the cultivators in the place of the outer fringe. Seeing their doubtful expressions, and some of them even started to cast a spell, she quickly waved her hand on the crane and said, Stop, stop, I am from Yunshan. Her tone was youthful and lively, which was not common among the ordinary cultivators in Yunshan. Seeing that she did not mean any harm and her appearance was pleasant, A male cultivator in the place of the outer fringe said, "Fairy, you are from Yunshan? How come I have never heard of such? At this point he did not know how to describe it. The female cultivator covered her mouth and giggled, "It is normal that you have never seen me before. I am neither Daotong nor Kenzo, but a pitiful girl who does not belong to any sect. I'm just a pitiful girl who doesn't belong to any sect. Where are you going to see me?" The people who did not belong to Daotong or Kenzo on Yunshan were the mortal servants on the mountain. However, this woman could fly in the air, which showed that she was also a cultivator in the place of the outer fringe and not a mortal. The cultivator who asked the question was puzzled, but someone behind him was startled and said, "She is Taoist priest Dan Qing?" For a moment, everyone was stunned and then they all quieted down. Taoist priest Dan Qing was a painting cultivator. There were painting cultivators on Yunshan, but there were very few of them, and they were worshipped by the various grotto heavens. Most of the paintings used by the low-level disciples on Yunshan were created by these painting cultivators. These people's identities were very special. Firstly, their skills were indeed useful. Before the art of painting was completed, there was only one way for cultivators to pass through the tribulation. It was to leave the mountain to train. Now that there was such a simple method, they would not let it die in vain. Chapter 430. However, on the other hand, the art saint joined the devil, and the art sect also became a devil path. It was erased from the history books and no one was allowed to mention it again. The identity of these Taoist painters was also sensitive. The cultivators of Daotong and Kenzo all had Taoist names, but the Taoist painters didn't have Taoist names. They were only called by their names. These people usually lived like princes, but in fact there were many restrictions on their words and actions. It was not an exaggeration to say that they were well-treated prisoners. Therefore many cultivators knew that there were a few Taoist painters on Cloud Mountain, but no one had ever seen them. But now, to suddenly meet such a person on the battlefield outside of Cloudy Mountain, with such a likable appearance and adorable words, how could he not be shocked? Seeing them like this, the female cultivator didn't feel uncomfortable. She jumped down from the crane and landed on the cloud. She grabbed the air with her palm, and the red-crowned crane turned into a small piece of paper and was put into her palm. This was the method of the art sect and it proved her identity. As soon as she landed, the cultivators closest to her took a few steps back. It was as if this female cultivator had a terrible disease and didn't want to be infected. However, this retreat was just a subconscious action. When they reacted, the female cultivator had already passed through the crowd and walked toward the four masters. She seemed to be used to the reactions of the cultivators and didn't care. However, there was a faint smile on her face as if she was just walking through a group of fellow disciples. In a few seconds she walked behind Ku Chanzi and the three True Realm cultivators. She stopped 3 or 4 steps away from them. She didn't salute them but bowed like a mortal. "Mortal girl Xan Shilio is a saint, and I have news for sect leader Ku Chanzi." There were naturally female cultivators among the cultivators. However, there was no difference between female and male cultivators in Daotong and Kenzo. They all had to abandon their sexual desires. They were also particular about righteousness. Therefore, in the eyes of mortals, these female cultivators might be beautiful, but they always lacked the charm of a woman. The same group of male cultivators stood together, and at a glance there was no difference between them. They were all just cultivators. However, this Taoist priest who called herself Xan Shilio had a gentle and pleasant voice and a charming figure. She bowed gracefully. Her temperament was completely different from those female cultivators from the Shenmen sect. On the other hand, many cultivators in the transcendent state who had yet to go through the love tribulations were slightly tempted. Then, he heard her claim that she had sent news for the saint. After a moment of shock, he was delighted. Did it mean that the 2 sages on Cloud Mountain had learned of what happened here and were enraged, so they asked this female cultivator to send the message, to kill that demon on the spot? Ku Chanzi and the 3 True Realm cultivators didn't answer her immediately. After sitting for a while, the Langya Paradise's sect master said, "Ling Jizi. Ask her what news the saint has sent." Ling Jizi was the name of a transcendent state cultivator who stood next to Xan Shilio. While the other cultivators had avoided this woman, Ling Jizi had not. It was as if he thought it was beneath his status to let her. However, Ku Chanzi didn't talk to Xan Shilio directly. Instead, he asked her to ask his name. Only then did they remember that Ling Jizi was Ku Chanzi's grand disciple. Ku Chanzi's former disciple was Qing Kongzi, the sect master of the Nine Heavens Divine Thunder sect in Daotong. Cheng Kongzi was Ling Jizi's Taoist master. A month ago, when several sects raided Lord Dongting Mountain, they used Cheng Kongzi's Dharma treasure to attack Li Yunxin. After that, Cheng Kongzi was killed by Li Yunxin in the wild forest. Now Ling Jizi had lost his master and only had Ku Chanzi as his grandmaster. Ku Chanzi seemed to disdain talking to Xian Shilio. This was surprising. A profound realm cultivator's heart was like an ancient well. How could he have such a deep prejudice? After receiving the grandmaster's order, Ling Jizi's face turned serious and he was about to ask Xian Shilio. However, the female cultivator didn't wait for him to ask and said, "Sect Master, the sages have announced that the demon Li Yunxin has come to surrender. If there is any conflict, please show some courtesy. Bring him to Cloud Mountain and the two sages will make a decision." When she spoke, she was neither servile nor overbearing and had a smile on her face. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was very clear. Even Li Yunxin could hear it. When he heard these words, he turned his head and looked at the sky. He saw that Xian Shilio was also looking at him and she blinked her left eye quickly. This unexpected and playful action stunned Li Yunxin. He didn't even care about the news of the sages that she brought. This woman who called herself Xian Shilio. What's going on? The cultivators outside the restriction were also stunned. They had thought that the sages wanted to kill the demon. They didn't expect that they would be polite to him. The demon had killed the head of a sword sect. How could they be polite to him? For a moment, all the turbulent emotions disappeared. They all held their breaths in silence and turned their heads to look at Ku Chanzi. They didn't dare to say anything about the news from the sages, so they could only pin their hopes on the sect master of the Langya cave abode. But it was hard to tell whether Ku Chanzi was surprised or not. He was silent for a full 3 breaths before he said, "Ask her. Why did she exchange glances with that demon?" Before this, almost all the cultivators' eyes were on her. She blinked at Li Yunxin as if no one else was around and they all saw it. However, they were so shocked by the news that they didn't have the mood to think about it for a while. Now that Ku Chanzi said so, they realized that it was indeed very strange. Ling Jizi's face darkened and he was about to ask again. Xian Shilio didn't wait for him and said with a smile, "Because I cultivate painting Taoism. I've been on Cloud Mountain for many years, and I haven't seen any fellow disciples. Now that I heard that the demon also cultivates painting Taoism, I feel close to him for no reason." "Sect Master, don't you feel close to your fellow disciples?" Everyone's expression changed. How dare she say these words in such a dignified manner? This time, before Ku Chanzi could say anything, Ling Jizi poured out his anger for being ignored twice. He frowned and shouted, "Close? Do you know that this demon killed the head of the Golden Light sect an hour ago? How could you feel close to such an evil person?" Really? He rarely got angry. Therefore, he couldn't find any appropriate words to express his feelings at this moment. But Xian Shilio twisted her sleeves with her fingers and covered her mouth, laughing. She lowered her head slightly and rolled her eyes. "But I'm a witch of the unorthodox path. It's not strange for me to feel close to a demon. Don't you think so, Sect Master Ku Chanzi?" Ling Jizi originally wanted to say that she was a witch of the unorthodox path. However, she was the envoy of the sages, so it was hard to say. Now, this woman admitted it calmly, and she seemed to be quite proud of herself. This made people even more depressed and they didn't know what to say. At this time, the curiosity and affection the cultivators had for Xian Shilio were all gone, leaving only disgust. No wonder the Taoists of Shenmen strictly forbade contact with these painting Taoists. Now, what painting Taoists were obviously evil Taoists. Chapter 431. Ku Chanzi finally opened his eyes after hearing her shameless words. But he didn't look at her. He only looked at Li Yunxin from afar. Humph. The sage must have other plans since he can tolerate a witch like you. You are arrogant today, but you will be punished in the future. I won't argue with you for now. But be courteous? He sneered. Even if we are courteous, do you think this demon dares to come out of this prohibition? If you can persuade him and ask him to come out. Humph, it won't be too late for me to make other plans. The 3 true state cultivators were speechless when they heard this. The Taoist priests and swordsmen in the place of the outer fringe were slightly excited. Master. However, Ku Chanzi stood up and waved his hand. No need to say more. Their conversation was heard by Li Yunxin. Some of it was originally for him to hear. For example, Ku Chanzi's last few words were quite threatening. Su Sheng blinked in his sleeve. Do you really dare to go out? Li Yunxin squinted his eyes and stared at Xan Shilio. This woman's appearance was not outstanding. That was for him. The women he had seen, Bai Yunxin, Ling Kongzi and even Red Lady, were all rare beauties in the world. Now he gave Xan Shilio an evaluation of not outstanding. If it was in other places, it was enough to be called beautiful like a flower and the moon. Although her appearance was not outstanding, her temperament was especially special. Now that Li Yunxin's state of mind was broken, he was not as cold as before. Therefore he took a few more glances at her. After hearing Su Sheng's question he thought for a while, Humph. Ku Chanzi is just being stubborn. It was not that the Taoist priest in the mystic state was afraid of him. He was afraid of the sage. He had experienced how the Taoist priest in Daotong talked about the two sages when he was at the Dongting. At that time he had just killed Yunzi and reached the true state. He is held hostage by Lord Dongting, a monster in the mysterious realm, and Kun Wuzi, a Taoist in the mysterious realm. However, he took advantage of the situation and used the excuse that the jade slip was related to the secrets of the two saints to scare Kun Wuzi into throwing the jade slip back to him. It could be seen that Daotong's Xinjing Taoist was truly in awe of the two sages. Now that Ku Chanzi was sitting in Kun Wuzi's previous position, there shouldn't be any difference. But there was one thing: who knew if those people were acting or not? For example, he could get a female cultivator from somewhere and have her disguise as Taoist painting priest Xan Shilio. Then he would put on a show with this group of people, pretending that he had no choice but to obey the saint's order to trick him out. Then he suddenly changed his expression, laughed out loud 3 times, and blasted them to smithereens on the spot. If it were him he would have done so. Thus he gently shook his head. But let's just take a look. After saying this, Xan Shilio bowed to Ku Chanzi again. She seemed to be thanking the lord of the Langya cave abode for being reasonable and giving her this opportunity. Then she turned to look at Li Yunxin, and Li Yunxin also looked at her. After looking at each other for 2 breaths, Xan Shilio opened her mouth and said with a smile, "You demon, why don't you come out? Are you afraid that it's a trap?" Li Yunxin didn't say anything. The female cultivator said again, "Why don't you think about why you didn't die tonight? What's there to be afraid of when you see me?" To the cultivators there was nothing to criticize about her words, they were just weak persuasion. However, to Li Yunxin, the fingers under his big sleeves moved slightly. There was a hidden meaning in his words. Xan Shilio had made the cultivators angry and speechless with just a few words, which showed that she was sharp-tongued. So at this time, to persuade an extremely vigilant demon, every word must be carefully thought out, and there would be no need to mix in some unimportant nonsense. But she added the word inexplicable. This phrase was worth pondering. In the eyes of the people of the celestial sect, it was probably understood as, the demon was surrounded well, and suddenly a Taoist priest in painting came and inexplicably wanted to let the demon go. However, to Li Yunxin he felt that it should refer to something else. If one were to talk about inexplicable things, the most inexplicable thing that happened to him tonight was the sudden gathering of a sufficiently strong power of will from the Wei River, pushing him to the level of a perfected master in one go. Otherwise he would have to spend more effort to kill the golden light and he wouldn't be so relaxed now. Is this what she is referring to? He calmed himself down. His face was calm, but he had already paid attention to what she was going to say next. Seeing that he didn't respond, Xan Shilio sighed. Okay. You don't trust me, but don't you trust the people who sent me here? Now that you think about it, don't you think you've done what they promised you? Hearing this, Li Yunxin's pupils suddenly dilated, and he almost frowned. How could this little girl be so bold? He heard her say inexplicable before, and she was thinking about the burning incense at Wei River, so he knew that maybe Munanja's people made a move tonight and cooperated with him. So he thought, could this little girl be Munanja's spy in the celestial sect? This idea was shocking and bold enough. But it wasn't impossible. The Freemasonry could almost control the celestial sect. And Munanju, who had been secretly competing with them, didn't have any clever tricks? It was reasonable for the two sides to send spies to each other. Unexpectedly, as soon as he had this idea, Xan Shilio said, "The people who sent me here, and what they promised you, the people who sent her here were the two sages and the two sages, but they didn't promise anything to him, Li Yunxin." Then, the hidden meaning was in line with his bold conjecture, wasn't it? Munanju had promised him to subdue Wei River for him. Didn't she mean the two sages, but Munanju's people? But she said it so openly, just like how she had admitted that she was a demonic woman of the unorthodox path before. How dare she? Her words not only surprised Li Yunxin, but also surprised Ku Chanzi and the other cultivators. The Langya cave abode master frowned and shouted, "What are you talking about? Oh, what's the matter?" The profound realm masters felt that something was wrong, so they were on guard. The pressure from this was unbearable for ordinary people. But Xian Shilio's expression didn't change. She just smiled faintly and said, "Do you want to ask me about this? Of course I'm talking about the sages." The saint had already talked to this demon before and even promised him a few things. "If you don't believe me, you can ask the sages yourself." Only Li Yunxi knew that what she said to Ku Chanzi was all nonsense. This woman, in front of so many cultivators, she directly put the blame on the two sages, and her expression didn't change. Who would believe that she was lying? This kind of psychological quality. He took a deep breath. How come he had never heard of such a person before? Hearing her words, Ku Chanzi froze for a moment and then turned his face away from her. It seemed that he had known Xian Shilio before, and now he believed her words. Chapter 432. Ignoring the uproar of the cultivators behind her, Xian Shilio looked at Li Yunxin again. "Demon, since you are willing to forsake the darkness for the light, tonight is a great opportunity for you. You call yourself the Wei River Dragon King, but it's just an empty title. Whether you can become a king or a marquis depends on whether you can seize the opportunity tonight. Are you still going to hesitate and wait for this Ku Chanzi to kill you?" 3 breaths later. Li Yunxin gently waved his sleeve, put Su Sheng away and stood up. Xian Shilio was indeed a spy of Nanmuju lurking in Xianmen. He had made sure of it. Become a king or a marquis, the master of Nanmuju had asked by Mo to pass a message to him, saying that the current battle was the battle of the marquis between the major forces. With his strength alone, he was not qualified to participate in this battle. He had asked by Mo to reply to the master of Nanmuju, saying that he would talk about cooperation with Nanmuju during the battle for the throne. Now, Xian Shilio's become a king or a marquis was simply the most straightforward way to express what had happened that day. This was the third code word. She had used this method to eliminate all the uncertainties and clearly told herself that she was a member of Nanmuju. This woman was courageous, meticulous, and cunning. He stood up. Ku Chanzi's expression changed slightly, and the other cultivators were also surprised. It was hard to imagine that someone could persuade this demon so easily with just 3 sentences. One should know how fierce this guy was. Although Su Sheng was kept in his sleeve, he still asked, "Are you really going out?" Li Yunxin squinted at Xian Shilio for a while and said in a low voice, "I have a good reason to believe that she is an ally. The reason to believe that Ku Chanzi will not kill me is also good enough. I can't hide here forever. Moreover, there is no perfect thing in this world. What about you?" After saying this, he raised his hand and slowly pointed in the void. Every time he touched it, there would be a mysterious light and a fine indistinct pattern would appear around it. It was like a spider web. Thus, the 36 ghosts behind him gradually shrank, and finally became 36 small light spots, all of which melted into the palm of his right hand. 36 tiny golden stars formed an extremely faint ring in the center of his palm. When Su Sheng saw this, he seemed to be slightly surprised. "You refine it?" The golden light refined the golden swords transformed from 36 ghosts into the ocean of chi and mountain of snow, but it was pulled out, and its cultivation was greatly damaged. She had thought that this was a lesson to be learned from the mistakes of others, but who knew that Li Yunxin would do the same thing now? Although it was not refined into the Qi Si, it was roughly refined into the Zhongzhu and Higu acupoints, which could be considered as deeply entering the divine soul. He was a demon. If he had enough wish power, it would be easy for his cultivation to soar. Moreover, Su Sheng knew that he was full of tricks, so it would not be difficult for him to swindle some incense and wish power. Besides, he was a demon among the demons and his body was extremely strong. Why did he have to refine a magic treasure into his soul and leave a weak point? Li Yunxin did not answer him. With a flip of his left hand he took out a few other treasures. They were the deity cloak, the cloud collecting platform, the Chendi mirror, and the world mirror. These 4 treasures formed a Tao treasure, and were his spoils of war tonight. And at this moment, in front of the many cultivators of the celestial sect of wonders outside the light barrier, bit by bit, these 4 treasures of the celestial sect of wonders were completely refined into his own soul. No one made a sound, because they knew that even if they angrily scolded and threatened him, they would not be able to stop this demon from doing this. Instead, it would weaken their morale. Thus, they could only suppress the surging anger and regret in their hearts, almost causing internal injuries. The only thing they could use to comfort themselves was, "It's not good to be greedy, Li Yunxin." Su Sheng saw that he was doing all this and couldn't help but remind him. In the secular world, carpenters, masons and masons all had a threshold to enter the profession, not to mention Taoist treasures. Daotong and Kenzo cultivators had focused on Taoist techniques for hundreds of years, and with tens of thousands of years of experience and the guidance of famous teachers, they could finally control magic treasures with ease. This kind of experience was not something that could be complemented by the words, heavenly genius. Li Yunxin's perception on the path of cultivation was extremely high, but just like before, he only dared to pick a few divine abilities from the translucent jade slip to learn. This Tao treasure formed by 4 sage treasures, he could not immediately use it with ease. Even if Su Sheng, who was once a sage, had already taught him the essence of controlling these treasures in a concise manner. But right now he seemed to only want to roughly refine them and not to master them. In fact, apart from the glazed sword heart that he could control, the other 4 could only be considered to have been refined into his soul. If he were to really use them against an enemy, it would instead cause him to be flustered. With his talent, it would be very difficult to use them without a few years of practice. But Li Yunxin still remained silent. After half an hour, when all these things were done, he asked again, "Then, do you want to go up Cloud Mountain with me or?" After a while, Su Sheng said in his sleeve, "I'm not as adventurous as you are." Li Yunxin abruptly swung his sleeve. The layer of mysterious light outside the glazed sword heart was removed by him. In an instant, a deafening noise resounded and a gust of wind blew. The airflow between heaven and earth immediately filled this huge bubble. The gust of wind coming from all directions collided in this space, stirring up an even more terrifying cyclone. The slightly solidified rocks and unsolidified magma were all swept up into the sky, and a huge amount of heat and smoke were thrown in all directions. A black tornado of several hundred meters high took shape, and in just 3 breaths of time, it plowed a terrifying deep hole where Li Yunxin was standing. But he had already flown out. In just 1 breath of time, he had already fled to the front of nearly 100 profound gate cultivators. Above the sky, the gust of wind blew. The cultivators' sleeves fluttered in the air, but their bodies did not move. The monster Li Yunxin was a stone's throw away from them, and he did not move either. Their gazes met, and the collision of their gazes could almost create sparks in this cold autumn night. Some transcendent state cultivators were eager to try. But Ku Chanzi did not make a move, so they could only endure. After the stalemate lasted for a dozen breaths, Ku Chanzi gently took a breath and turned to look at Xan Shilio. He turned to look at Xan Shilio and said, "I will ask the 2 sages whether what you said is true or not." Xan Shilio smiled. "You don't have to report to me." Ku Chanzi's expression did not change. However, his left hand, which was behind his back, turned slightly and pointed again. A talisman made of mysterious light appeared out of thin air and imprinted on Xan Shilio's sleeve. "If you're not going to Mount Yun, this talisman can protect your body and soul." Xan Shilio was still smiling. "Thank you, master." Ku Chanzi did not say anything else and he flew into the sky. Once he left, the 3 true state cultivators also left without saying a word. The remaining nearly 100 transcendent state cultivators were still glaring at Li Yunxin. At this moment they looked slightly panicked. When Li Yunxin suddenly smiled evilly and leaned forward, the group of people immediately rode on all kinds of magic treasures to escape as if they were competing. Chapter 433. Only Li Yunxin and Xan Shilio were left in the night sky. After a moment of silence, Li Yunxin shook his head and said, "Little girl, you are really bold." Xan Shilio smiled slightly and said, "I'm not as bold as Dragon King. I've heard a lot about Dragon King from my master. He's probably the hero in the hearts of all the girls in the world." She called Li Yunxin Dragon King, which was indeed what people in Munanju called him. Li Yunxin smiled and said, "So now, shall we go to Yunshan?" Xan Shilio tilted her head and said, "Doesn't Dragon King want to know what happened at Weishui River tonight? I'm a great hero, so I have to be magnanimous. How can I ask questions as soon as I see him?" Li Yunxin turned his body slightly and stretched out a hand. "Please?" His behavior was called gentlemanly in his previous world. Although it was not so particular here, sometimes body language was always the same. Xan Shilio understood and smiled again. She seemed to think it was also very interesting, so she turned around happily. The 2 of them flew in the sky side by side and went higher. Just like that they soared. When the ground was far away and the fire on the ground was only a small dot of light, they turned and went northwest. At this moment Li Yunxin asked, "So what happened at Weishui River tonight?" "It was only a quarter of an hour." Xan Shilio heard his question and laughed. "So Dragon King is so impatient." High up in the sky the wind was fierce and the temperature was extremely low. Li Yunxin was a demon, so he was not afraid of such cold and wind. Xan Shilio was a human, so she summoned the red-crowned white crane. As soon as the crane appeared, the surrounding cold wind was immediately repelled. The two of them were immediately wrapped in a ball of warmth, as if they were bathing in the spring night. Li Yunxin was silent for a moment. He looked at the crane she was sitting on. "Is this the crane in the pine and crane prolonging life painting?" For example, teachers in the secular world would always have a few examples to teach them how to read and write. When it came to the art of painting, there were also some paintings that were often used to teach new students. Paintings like the eternal pine and crane painting were commonly used by painters in the secular world. Taoists in painting also used them. When Li Yunxin was young, his parents had taught him the same thing. But now he saw this familiar thing. In fact, it was a slightly complicated feeling. He used to think that he was the only one in the world who cultivated the art of painting. After becoming a demon, he was also alone, his shadow hanging by itself. But tonight, this young lady who also cultivated in the painting Tao had suddenly appeared. Furthermore, she had said something about being friendly, and was on the same front as him. For a moment he felt a little emotional. It was like walking in the vast wilderness and suddenly meeting one of their own. Moreover, compared to the art saint who was well known but illusory, this kind of person was very vivid. Xan Shilio winked a little playfully and patted the back of the white crane lightly. "Dragon King is a master of painting. Could it be that my methods are also worthy of your discerning eyes?" "Very good," Li Yunxin commented briefly. Xan Shilio smiled again. "Then I will have the confidence to tell Dragon King what happened tonight. Dragon King should know that we have already subdued the Wei River for you. We have also made arrangements in many places and are ready to act at any time. We are just waiting for a word from Dragon King." When she said this, there was still a smile in her eyes. She was very much like a lively young lady. Now that she had seen her favorite hero, joy flowed from her eyes. But Li Yunxin only nodded. Who would believe that she was just a lively young lady? That kind of young lady could not be a spy of Munanju, sneak into Shanmen, no, sneak into the Freemasonry and get close to the fake saint. Such a woman's thoughts must be extremely terrifying. Under this beautiful appearance, perhaps there is a heart of a snake and scorpion, Li Yunxin said to himself in his heart. Then he let out a light breath. He observed her carefully while listening to her continue. "So tonight, in all the temples along the Wei River Dragon King's 100-foot dragon body appeared at the same time and rain fell." Xan Shilio said slowly, at the same time looking at Li Yunxin's expression. "And our people stirred up the public opinion everywhere. When the people saw this, how could they have any other thoughts? They naturally believed it without a doubt. But tonight, for the sake of the Dragon King, many of the spies that had been planted long ago had appeared. Some of them will be used as spies in the future and some can't be used anymore. Roughly estimating, it involves no less than 10,000 people. Maybe more than 1,000 people will die." Xan Shilio sighed in a low voice, "And all this is just to help Dragon King succeed tonight." There was only a faint smile on Li Yunxin's face, and no emotion could be seen. Hearing what she said, he thought for a moment. "You are a painter. So, the 100-foot dragon body was painted by you?" "It's a shame." Xan Shilio pursed her lips and smiled, looking down at Li Yunxin. There was a hint of shyness in the smile between her eyebrows. But this shyness was not hidden like that of ordinary women. Instead, it was exposed, which made her strangely attractive. "Now that I'm closer and have a closer look at you, Dragon King, I realize how handsome you are. Before this, I only saw Dragon King once from afar. Those original paintings of the 100-foot dragon body were made by me thinking about that side. Before this, they were stored everywhere along the Wei River, waiting to be used. Looking at them now, how can they compare to you now? You've seen me before." Li Yunxin frowned slightly. It was not a good feeling to know that such a woman had secretly observed him. "When I was in Qingdu, I saw you from afar. At that time there was a dog-headed Taoist beside you." Xan Shilio said this in a slightly proud tone. It was the kind of cute showing off of a girl, and it was not annoying. "Oh." Li Yunxin smiled. "But why did you help me tonight?" "I remember I said, it's not really helping Dragon King. It's helping ourselves. Xan Shilio combed her hair behind her ear, and her expression became more serious. It seemed that what she was about to say next was a paraphrase of someone's words, and she was very respectful of that person, so she became serious. My master said that he was very negligent when he saw Dragon King for the first time. The second time he saw Dragon King, he also accidentally messed up. So I know that Dragon King is a proud person, and he doesn't like free gifts or charity. So in the future I probably have to do good things without asking for rewards. This time it's not to help Dragon King. But we found a Freemasonry spy among us. Li Yunxin raised his eyebrows slightly. Oh. But we can't find out who it is. We arranged for some people to sneak into the Freemasonry, but someone was instigated. Now we only found something unusual, but we can't find out who it is. So I need to find that person. Then I have to do a lot more things. Those things can't be covered up by ordinary means. So I need a good excuse. Dragon King made a big scene here tonight, so we will cooperate with Dragon King this time, to send Dragon King to Yunshan. In this way Dragon King also practices painting and I also practice painting. I'm also an unorthodox witch. In the future, it's reasonable to act a little absurd on Yunshan. So, she turned to look at Li Yunxin. It's not helping Dragon King. It's asking for help from Dragon King. Li Yunxin was silent for a while and suddenly laughed. He laughed and shook his head. Xan Shilio didn't know what he was laughing about. Then Li Yunxin sighed. How should I put these things? For example, two people get along. Some people seem to hit it off and no matter what, they feel comfortable to be together. That's the saying, no discord, no concord. As for some people, they shouldn't be together in the first place. So, no matter how carefully they try to get along, they always feel that something is wrong. Actually, you don't need to be like this. Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head. Everything is too calculative and you can't look smooth, it will make people uncomfortable. For example, your style of doing things, you always like to lay out the pros and cons. You probably think that's how I do things. I'm this kind of person and I like this kind of style. But in fact, I prefer, to be a little more hypocritical and beautiful. This way no one will be embarrassed. After saying these words he paused. But since you've already done this, if I don't give you face, it'll be too impolite. Tell me, what do you want me to do? Xan Shilio looked at him and was slightly relieved. She hurriedly said, in my master's place, there's nothing to ask Dragon King to do. Dragon King can go to Yunshan and do what he wants to do. I just need to borrow the power of Dragon King. She said this, but it seemed that she didn't have enough. Li Yunxin asked, what about in your place? Xan Shilio blinked, and the expression on her face softened. It seemed that after talking about her master, she began to talk about her own matters. In my place. She gently bit her lips. The illumination jade slip of the Holy Bible of painting is in the hands of Dragon King. Dragon King is a genius in this field. I hope that Dragon King can teach me. Li Yunxin's heart jumped slightly. The reasons that Xan Shilio said just now were all valid. I hope to borrow the power of Dragon King to find out the spy and so on. But he always felt that Mu Nanju's purpose should be more than this. Now that this little girl said this, an obvious warning sign appeared in his heart. She mentioned the name of the illumination jade slip. This was the first time they met and she mentioned this almost taboo thing. This would make him suspicious. And like now he would focus all his attention on this matter. But, what if the other party also thought of this? What if she wanted to use the illumination jade slip to attract his attention? In fact, she wanted to take the opportunity to plot something else. But what plot? Li Yunxin didn't know if he thought too much. But he suppressed the emotion in his heart and smiled sideways. There are also painting cultivators in Yunshan. How do you inherit it? Are you from Mu Nanju? Are you already or? Li Yunxin didn't answer her, and the little girl seemed to be a little disappointed, and the disappointment was written on her face. She opened her mouth. Did I say something wrong? I didn't have other ideas and I didn't want to do anything. She defended herself as if she felt that the more she explained, the more she made things worse. She said and laughed vexedly as though she were angry with herself. All right. Lao Wang is right. You can't talk casually with Dragon King. Every word should be in your stomach 3 times and when it reaches your throat you should swallow it. Only when you feel that there is nothing wrong can you say it. Li Yunxin smiled but didn't say anything. Xan Shilio said, oh, okay, I will tell Dragon King first. The Taoist priests in Yunshan are selected from the mortals of Yunshan. Dragon King, do you know that there are a lot of mortals on Yunshan? About every 50 years some people will be sent down and some will be selected. I think, There are tens of thousands of mortals on the mountain now. Among so many mortals, there must be some who are suitable for cultivation. I was selected because of this. At this time they didn't know how far they had flown. Looking down, the ground was dark. Occasionally there were sporadic light spots which seemed to be the towns where humans lived. However, they were as small as sparks and almost couldn't be seen clearly. Li Yunxin thought for a while. So, you are from Mu Nanju, so you were coincidentally chosen? Xanxilio smiled. Dragon King laughed at me. I was not chosen because I was from Mu Nanju. It was because I was chosen, and I happened to be from Mu Nanju. She paused for a while. There are many of us on Yunshan, and among those mortals. 18 years ago, there were more than 2,000 children of the right age to learn painting. Dragon King, can you guess how many of these 2,000 people are our people? Li Yunxin thought for a while. A quarter? Xanxilio smiled. Dragon King is really smart. A quarter. The mortals on Yunshan go in and out once every 50 years. Our people have been there for a long time. My birth parents are both from Mu Nanju. After I was chosen, I became the chief steward of Yunshan. That is to say, Li Yunxin frowned slightly. If there are 50,000 people on Yunshan, there are more than 10,000 of you? For him, this was an unimaginable number. 10,000 people was comparable to the regular army of some small countries. Xanxilio saw through his thoughts. Ah. The people on Yunshan, our people, may be slightly different from what Dragon King thinks. She raised her hand and pointed to the sky. In the eyes of cultivators, mortals are not really people. They rarely care about what mortals think, and they don't need to care about what mortals think. Dragon King, think about it. What kind of life do mortals live? She counted with her fingers and said bit by bit, many people have problems eating and wearing warm clothes. The so-called rich can only eat some fine grains for a few days every month. But there are many things on Yunshan. Therefore, cultivators will not be like the masters of the secular world, who keep a close eye on their servants. They don't care about the things mortals care about. What they really treasure, mortals can't use, and secondly, they don't dare to use. The only thing they have to guard against is the scriptures. But those things, it is very difficult for mortals to get them. Therefore, cultivators don't care about many things these tens of thousands of people do. Then Dragon King should know that where there are many people, there will be Jianghu. Tens of thousands of people will not live in harmony. There will always be many forces that will divide them from the inside. This was probably the first time Li Yunxin came into contact with the internal affairs of Mu Nanju, but it was from the little girl that he met for the first time. She claimed that she was chosen to learn painting 18 years ago, so she should be around 18 or 19 years old now. 18 or 19 years old, to learn painting. She didn't have that many scriptures and she didn't have a reliable master, but she had already reached the state of transcendent. This reminded him of Ling Kongzi. This cloud mountain was truly a galaxy of talents. Perhaps there would be some even more talented people who would be buried for the rest of their lives. But Li Yunxin was very smart. After listening to what she said, he understood most of it. He pondered for a moment, then said, "You mean to say that these people will form cliques and factions? For example, the people in Jing City will talk about the Qingzhou gang, the Liangzhou gang, and so on. But they don't care. Not everyone in these gangs knows that they are from the Freemasonry. Only some of the leaders and managers are your people. You can control a few points, and at the same time, it will be easier to keep secrets." Xanxilio smiled and said, "Dragon King, you are so smart." Her smile was indeed the merry, innocent smile of a pretty girl. This caused Li Yunxin to have some thoughts in her heart. Previously he thought that this woman might be scheming and a terrifying opponent. He had been secretly observing Xanxilio's expression just now, trying to find any trace of abnormality. But to his surprise, there was nothing wrong with this girl's expression. Everything was normal. It seemed that every frown, every smile, every word, and every action of hers were sincere. This was the second time he had seen this. The first time was with the Zither Master. The Zither Master was a profound realm great demon with a high cultivation level. He was able to plant a restriction on himself without him knowing. In his eyes there was nothing unusual, but it meant that he was terrifyingly shrewd. It was not something others could estimate. After all, he had lived for a long time. It was reasonable for him to be so cunning. If Li Yunxin couldn't see it, it meant that he was not powerful enough. At first he thought that although Xanxilio looked like a young and beautiful girl, she was actually more than 100 years old. It was normal for her to be cunning. But now he knew that she was only 18 or 19 years old. An 18 or 19-year-old No matter how much he had experienced or how much he had seen, it was impossible for him to escape his discerning eyes. This was his confidence in himself. If he didn't have this confidence, he would have died a long time ago. But, was it true? He began to realize that the people he dealt with were always bad guys. Whether they were smart or stupid, they always had many tricks up their sleeves. He had been dealing with such people, and gradually he didn't believe that there were really pure and innocent people. Although it was a life-saving skill and a way to survive, it was also very sad. Thinking of this, he sighed in a low voice. You are a spy of Munanju. At such a young age, you could not show any flaws in front of a fake sage. You are very capable. The things you've done all these years can be written into a legend. Didn't you panic when you faced the Freemasons? Exanshilio was stunned for a moment and then laughed. Oh, it's my fault. I forgot to tell you, I am also a member of the Freemasons. Chapter 434. Li Yunxin was slightly stunned. Ha! Exanshilio pointed to herself. 18 years ago, a total of 20 children were selected to be Taoist painters, 4 of us. Dragon King also knows that the paintings we made are very useful. So, more than 20 of us Taoist painters were pulled into the Freemasonry. More than 20 of us are now nominally members of the Freemasonry. Daotong and Kenzo don't know about it. And among these 20 people, I don't know who the other 3 people are from Munanju. It's always been like this. I'm afraid that one person's identity will be exposed and implicate others. Dragon King also knows that cultivators' methods of extorting confessions are different from mortals. It's not like they can't say anything if they don't want to. Li Yunxin nodded. So, there seems to be a traitor among us. Exanshilio frowned, looking very angry at the person who betrayed Munanju. Among the 2 people besides me, one was instigated to defect. We know about this through some clues, but we still don't know how much the traitor revealed. This matter must be explained, otherwise there will be endless troubles. Li Yunxin thought for a moment and couldn't help but chuckle. But there was a hint of surprise in his laughter. That is to say, you are now a double-sided spy. You were born in Munanju but you were absorbed by the Freemasonry. Tonight you can work for the fake holy sage because of this identity? Exanshilio looked a little proud. Yes. Then, the one who was instigated to defect is even more powerful. Li Yunxin smiled and shook his head again. He was born in Munanju, entered Xianmen, and was absorbed by the Freemasonry. Then he was instigated to defect by the Freemasonry and became a spy of the Freemasonry. This is a 3-sided spy. But you still don't know who this person is. So I must find him. Exanshilio raised her eyebrows and said angrily. At this point, Li Yunxin's face looked relaxed, but her heart tightened. There were still no flaws. When talking about such a complicated topic, one's emotions would change several times in a single sentence. Under such circumstances, it was difficult for him to hide his emotions perfectly. But he still couldn't see any flaws. So he smiled and sighed, all right. Now I know that you have your reasons. So, what do you want me to teach you? Exanshilio was stunned for a moment, and then she jumped up happily. The white crane under her let out a long cry of dissatisfaction, which sounded like the sound of Bai Yunxin when she showed her real body. I'll learn whatever Dragon King teaches me, she said happily. Those Taoist priests and swordsmen of Mount Yunshan always say that they are orthodox and I am heretical. In my opinion, Dragon King should just start a new sect. The jade slip of enlightenment is in your hands, and you are the #1 painter in the world. You can be the new art saint, and I will be your first disciple. Whether it was sincere or not, this was indeed a happy expression that Li Yunxin rarely saw in others. So he shook his head and smiled. Not everyone can be a saint. One has to be in the Taishang realm. As for starting a sect, now that Daotong and Kenzo are still here, it will be very troublesome. I don't like to be followed by a group of people. Speaking of this, he suddenly remembered, it seemed to be a long time ago, but in fact it was not that long ago. He accepted 4 disciples in the house of the Qiao family in city of Wei, 5. At that time he just thought it was interesting and gave them some names. However, those little demons were also very diligent and behaved like disciples. But now, they were all scattered and withered. 2 of them died. One was still imprisoned in Mount Yinshan. One was seriously injured and was with Yu Meng. The other one, Qiao Jessen's wandering soul. He didn't know where she was now. She worked with the 2 dead demons and now, he didn't know how she was. He suddenly felt a little dull. He smiled again. I don't have time to teach you. In a dozen days, Mount Yunshan will land and Xianmen will start a war with the demons. At that time, I might not even be able to protect myself. Do you think your master is willing to let you go with me? Xian Shilio was stunned. Suddenly, her cheeks turned red, almost imperceptible. But she quickly tried to find a topic to cover up. Dragon King is so powerful, he will have a way. It is said that Dragon King used to be a human and later became Dragon King. If it were me, I would also. She stopped and said embarrassedly, did I ask something I shouldn't have asked again? Li Yunxin was silent for a while and suddenly smiled, nothing. Xian Shilio didn't know whether he was being perfunctory or sincere. Just when she was about to say something, she saw Li Yunxin turn his palm and suddenly throw something to her. Without hesitation, she immediately reached out to take it. Li Yunxin saw her action. Even now, his expression was still normal. Then Xian Shilio saw the thing in his palm. Her reaction, she was in a trance for a moment, she didn't know what it was. Then she was stunned. It seemed that a bold speculation suddenly appeared in her heart, but she didn't dare to believe it was true. Then a trace of fear floated in her heart. That bold speculation made her a little scared. If Li Yunxin was not wrong after the fear, there was a moment of worry about personal gains and losses. It was like a sensitive girl guessing the sudden feelings of a strange man. However, this kind of emotion was quickly suppressed by an even grander and more solemn emotion. All the previous reactions were her own, and the next reaction was based on the power and position she belonged to. Dragon King, what does this mean? Her expression became serious, and her tone became exactly the same as when she told Li Yunxin about her master's words. That was because the transparent object in her hands was, it seemed to be the jade slip of enlightenment. Li Yunxin frowned. It was still flawless. So he paused and looked at Xian Shilio. This is the jade slip of enlightenment, a holy book of painting. Don't you want to see this thing? Of course he wanted to. Which painter wouldn't want to? However, how many disasters had this thing caused? In the past few months, the Taoist masters of the Xianmen had fallen one after another, and there were also casualties among the great demons. Not to mention the mortals who were affected like ants that no one cared about, and the general trend of the world being in turmoil. Although it couldn't be said that it was all because of this jade slip of enlightenment, it was definitely related to it. It could almost be said that this thing was the fuse that detonated all of this. At this time, it was almost a hot potato. Strong people with supernatural power could try to fight for it. If people with low cultivation got it, it was just a talisman that would hasten their lives. Xian Shilio held it as if she was holding a fragile crystal. This is Dragon King's treasure, how dare I accept it? She seemed to be trying hard to calm herself down. Shilio said something wrong before. Dragon King? Don't make fun of me. I'm not joking, Li Yunxin said seriously. Now I'm going to the fake sage. The two of them have always wanted my jade slip of enlightenment. If I bring it with me, it's equivalent to giving it to them for free. It's better to give it to you. He looked at Xian Shilio with a solemn expression. You'll keep it for the time being. In their eyes, you're one of them and there's no reason for them to hide it. They won't search you, right? At this point he paused. Xian Shilio was stunned for a while before saying, "Oh, and you're from Munanju." Li Yunxin continued and smiled at the same time. You just said some reasons for your people to help me. After I heard it, I thought about it and felt that it made sense. But I also feel that you should have some other considerations. Although the Freemasonry and I have a feud of killing my parents, everyone knows that I, Li Yunxin, am a sinister and cunning person, right? Xian Shilio hurriedly opened her mouth to speak. But Li Yunxin waved his hand and stopped her. So if I can go up to Cloud Mountain alive, the Freemasonry will think that I have value and want to recruit me. It's not impossible for me to take shelter with them for the time being. You've thought of this, haven't you? That's why you helped me and made your attitude clear. Alas, Li Yunxin smiled, it's also the result I expected at the beginning. I came here to make a scene, and once the Freemasonry showed any intention of recruiting me, you guys would definitely not sit still and help me. At the same time, it also confirmed my other guess. You also have eyes and ears inside the Freemasonry. Xian Shilio just blinked and did not speak. So now I give this thing to you as a return for a plum. The so-called reason that you guys helped me tonight and only asked to use my identity to move freely sounds like a free favor to me. I'm not a fool. As long as you start to treat our relationship seriously, I'm willing to give you enough goodwill. This thing. Just take it as my goodwill. After a while, Xian Shilio said awkwardly, but this, if the Dragon King is really handed to me, I will definitely not hide it. Such an important thing. Shilio has to hand it over to the master. Then hand it over. Li Yunxin said indifferently, only I know the method to open this thing. It doesn't matter whose hands it is in. Xian Shilio was speechless for a while. Looking at Li Yunxin's eyes, in addition to doubt and surprise, there was also a trace of other emotions. It was very rare to see a handsome person like him. Before she met Li Yunxin, the rumors about this Wei River Dragon King seemed to mainly focus on words like cunning, fierce, and ruthless. But now that she saw him with her own eyes, although she knew that he was indeed different from ordinary people, she also slowly realized that this living person seemed to be even more different from the rumors. It seemed, how was he cunning and fierce? He was more like an upright and magnanimous person. At least, it was impossible for there to be a second person in this world who would casually give something like the enlightened jade slip to another girl whom he met for the first time. Xian Shilio seemed to be speechless because of such feelings, so Li Yunxin didn't say anything more for the time being. The two of them flew straight to the northwest, but they didn't fly directly to Cloud Mountain. If that was the case, it might take dozens of days. Xian Shilio seemed to have another way. The reason why he walked with Li Yunxin earlier was because he wanted to have time to talk. And Li Yunxin was very satisfied with her reaction. From the time he met her until now, it had only been more than an hour. At first it was fear, then hesitation. As for now, he wanted to dig something out from Xian Shilio. She claimed to be a double agent of the Freemasonry in Munanju, so she must have a lot of information. When Li Yunxin dealt with them before, he could only watch from afar, so it was difficult for him to find a breakthrough. Now he finally found it, and he found two at once. If the identity of this girl was really as she said. In fact, he could use some other means to get her to say a lot of things he was interested in. Li Yunxin knew that he had a terrifying advantage in a certain aspect. Especially for a girl who was inexperienced in the emotional aspect. So he threw the enlightened jade slip to her. This thing was obviously not a creation of this world. But the former art saint had great magical powers, and he had made some kind of transformation with the method of this world. Therefore, this thing also had the characteristics of the real jade slips in this world. Otherwise, why would the two sages and many high-level cultivators in the past all call it jade slip of enlightenment, when they had all seen it? Therefore, the so-called enlightened jade slip could leave one's aura. The cultivators of the Xianmen also used the jade slips to record the essence of their experience. Then they left a mark on the slip with their own spiritual aura, so they could roughly know where the jade slip was and whether it was damaged. Of course, it was not as accurate and mysterious as the so-called location in his previous world. But at least they could know whether the jade slip was in the west, north, or northwest. On the other hand, the mark he left was performed with the method of painting Dao. It was the most suitable supernatural power for the cultivators of the true state to practice. If he wanted to break the mark he left, he would immediately know whether it was the method of painting Dao or some other method to break it by force. He wanted to further confirm whether Xian Shilio was from Munanju as she claimed to be. The whereabouts of the enlightened jade slip could be used as proof. And the people of Munanju called themselves the former subordinates of the art saint, so he could also know whether there were any experts who practiced painting Dao among them. Moreover, his realm was already very high. There were fewer and fewer methods in the enlightened jade slip that he could use. What he was in urgent need of was not advanced magic arts, but a more fundamental and systematic training method related to the art of painting. As for the so-called secret of ascension hidden in the enlightened jade slip, no one had found it in 1,000 years, not to mention in a short period of time. If the Freemasonry turned their attention to Munanju, he might be able to relieve some pressure. Of course, there was a more important purpose. However, that goal was too vague and elusive. It was just a thought. There was also a more important reason for him to hand over the enlightened jade slip at this moment. But that reason? Li Yunxin did not want to think about it now. Because it was one of his trump cards that he was not afraid of during this period of time. He had almost used this trump card a few times before. Now that he had come to this step, he really hoped that things could develop according to the trajectory he expected, to let him fight for himself, at least for a short period of time to rest and lick his wounds. They traveled like this for another 15 minutes. Finally, Xian Shilio carefully put away the enlightened jade slip. She stopped and looked at Li Yunxin. Dragon King? Is there anything else you want to tell me? I have a magic weapon that can travel 100,000 miles a day, we can use it to go. But in that case, there won't be time for Dragon King to say anything in detail. Perhaps the saying, taking someone else's gift, was also appropriate for cultivators. Or perhaps there were some other feelings in his heart. Xan Shilio's expression when talking to Li Yunxin was different from before. There was respect from before, but a hint of shyness seemed to be there as well. Li Yunxin looked at her gently. His voice was also gentle. I'd like to fly slowly with you. After saying this, he paused intentionally. Xan Shilio pursed her lips and smiled. It's also good. I can study the painting path with you on the way. Li Yunxin blinked. His beautiful eyes sparkled under the moonlight. He looked very charming and unrestrained. But I'm afraid that the people on Mount Yunshan will be too anxious to wait for us and ruin our plan again. Let's go there early and see what happens. He lowered his thick and dense eyelashes, thought for a moment, and looked at Xan Shilio again. I'm also very happy to have a kindred spirit. Xan Shilio was stunned for a while because of his gaze. But soon she turned her face and blinked with twinkling eyes. Ah, how dare Shilio and Dragon King be together? What? She seemed to be a little flustered. She stuttered a few words but couldn't find a suitable word. Ordinary girls would probably be more shy and flustered at this time. But this Xan Shilio, she suddenly stamped her feet, raised her fist and hit him in the air with anger and laughter. Then she turned to look at him. Dragon King, you're such a bad guy. Li Yunxin was slightly stunned and blinked her eyes as well. His gaze was gentle and frivolous and he said with a smile, So, how am I bad? Xan Shilio put the back of her fingers on her cheeks and looked at him from the corner of her eyes. It seemed that she was trying to cool down her slightly blushing face. I know that Dragon King likes to tease girls, by Yunxin, Red Lady, and the enchantress beside you. But, Dragon King, please don't tease me just because you're beautiful and Shilio admires your broad-mindedness and means, she exhaled softly, because I know that if I really fall in love with a person like Dragon King, it won't end well. Li Yunxin laughed. You're such a smart girl, how could you fall for my trick? Besides, how do you know that I don't really feel close because I found a kindred spirit? Xan Shilio pursed her lips and smiled again. A great hero like Dragon King won't care about kindred spirit or kindred spirit. Maybe it's just a spur-of-the-moment thing that I said to Shilio. Hearing her words, Li Yunxin's smile slowly disappeared. It turned into a kind of lost smile, looking a little disappointed. It seemed that he remembered an unforgettable experience that had been suppressed in his heart. He sighed with a smile and shook his head slightly. Alas. Fine. In the end I am a demon now. People say that I'm cunning and heartless. But I used to be a human. After saying this he looked up at Xan Shilio. The little girl didn't seem to expect that her words could evoke Li Yunxin's melancholy. It seemed that she didn't expect that he actually had such melancholy. She was stunned for a moment. After a while, a perturbed look appeared on her face and she was about to speak. Li Yunxin immediately laughed again as if he was suppressing the unhappiness in his heart. Fine, let's go to Yunshan immediately. So, the little girl felt a little guilty in her heart, but she couldn't express it. Seeing Li Yunxin's forced smile, soon the guilt slowly fermented and became stronger. She gently bit her lips, glanced at Li Yunxin and said cautiously, Then, let's go with Dragon King. So Li Yunxin smiled in his heart. Guilt, sympathy or curiosity were always easy to lead to other emotions. This was a good start. Chapter 435. At night, Li Yunxin and Xan Shilio go to Mount Yinshan. They talk a lot and think a lot. But someone else is going to the city of Wei. In fact, they are going to the former city of Wei. The fire that burned the city of Wei has just been extinguished for more than a month. With the huge and broken city as the center, the land within a radius of 10 miles is cracked. The vegetation has already withered. When the autumn wind blows, the sky is full of flying sand and choking smoke. There used to be a vast forest between the city of Wei and Dongting. But now the forest is gone. Before the fire in the city of Wei was extinguished, it ignited the vegetation in autumn. It burned from the city to the Dongting. Now the road is scorched black, as if it has been trampled and ravaged by an angry celestial being. Beside the Dongting Lake, there was a terrifying catastrophe. Mount June was blasted by thunder. One of the former magnificent scenery of Dongting no longer exists. Only half of a huge and ugly rock is standing on the water. But this is not the most frightening disaster. The real disaster is the water of Dongting Lake. In the past, Dongting with thousands of miles was vast and misty, like a fairyland. But now Dongting has almost become a dead place. When cultivators chased after Li Yunxin, they almost poisoned all the fish, shrimps and monsters in the entire lake. Although the venom in the water was removed later, the corpses were left in the lake. At first, the people living along the lake were overjoyed. They fished out the fresh fish and shrimps. They either ate them at home or sold them. But soon, anyone who touched those dead fish and shrimps had their skin ulcerated and vomited blood within 3 days. And those who ate these fish and shrimps bled from their 7 orifices and their internal organs were all broken. In just 4 or 5 days, thousands of people died. For a moment, they all knew that it was the disaster caused by those fish and shrimps. They hurriedly poured the rest into the lake. As for those dead bodies, no one dared to touch them. A few were buried and most of them were thrown into the lake. More than a month has passed, so many corpses are slowly rotting and fermenting in the lake. Soon all kinds of diseases have spread. Dongting becomes misty again. However, it was no longer water vapor but a terrifying miasma. The only thing to be thankful for is that Dongting can only be entered but not exited. The surging Wuxia River and several other small streams provide water for it, but it is not the source of a big river. As a result, the terrifying poisonous water and miasma only enveloped this vast area and did not spread out like it did in all directions. Even so, the entire south of the Qing kingdom still suffered a terrifying blow. The area around Dongting had been a land of fish and rice since ancient times. It was one of the food-producing areas of the Qing kingdom. Now no one dared to divert water from Dongting for irrigation. More people living along the lake had left their homes. Half of the Qing kingdom was already in a state of panic. However, those who had left their homes were originally living a prosperous life and could still get by. They had left their homeland for the sake of safety. But there were also some people who had no fixed abode and could not afford food and clothing. They didn't own any land and only made a living by working for others. At this time, for these people, it was another good thing. In order to cope with the current predicament, the state government issued an announcement. On the one hand, it was to appease people and persuade them to protect their homeland. On the other hand, it was said that anyone who went to the old city of Wei and the area around Dongting to reclaim the land which was now ownerless land, would be allocated to them and they would be exempted from taxes for 3 years. So many people came full of hope. And they saw the city of Wei and Dongting which had been changed beyond recognition. In fact, in their eyes it was not bad. Wuxia River was still clear and there were fish and shrimps in the water. It was said that the government was also inviting cultivators to seal the water mouth between Wuxia River and Dongting so that the poisonous water would not overflow. Large tracts of land were covered with the ashes of burning forests. It not only saved the effort of reclaiming land but also served as natural fertilizer. If they wanted to plant in winter and plow in spring, they only needed to dig out the roots of trees and grass in the wilderness. The workload was very small. Now it was mid-autumn. There was still time to plant some seedlings that could survive the winter before winter. With the grain provided by the government for half a year, there might be a bumper harvest next year. Such a prospect was an unimaginable happiness for many people. Therefore, there were more and more people around the city of Wei. Although there were not many people, they were gathering slowly. Tonight, 2 more people came treading through the night. They were 2 women. One was old and the other was young. In fact, the old woman was not old. She was only in her 30s and could be regarded as a middle-aged woman. In the late autumn night, she was wrapped in a navy blue cotton cloak and a bamboo hat. Her attire was neither fish nor fowl. She looked like someone from the Jianghu, but she also looked like an ordinary woman. However, there were a few patches on her cloak. Maybe it was because she was poor that she used the bamboo hat to protect herself from the wind and sand. This middle-aged woman called herself Grandmother Bean. Behind Grandmother Bean was a young lady who looked about 16 or 17 years old. She was also wearing coarse clothes and a bamboo hat. But there were more patches on her clothes. But even so, if someone looked carefully through the disheveled hair hanging down from her face, they would discover that this young lady was a heavenly fragrance and national beauty. This young lady called herself Mother Ling and said that she was Grandmother Bean's daughter. But outsiders would find it strange. This old woman did not care about her daughter. She carried a lot of things on her arms and back. She carried 2 huge halberds on her back which were 7 feet long. 1/3 of them were on her back, and the other 2 long halberds were high up in the sky. Ordinary men would find it difficult to walk with such a back, but Mother Ling walked very steadily. She carried a bundle of swords under her left armpit. But they did not look like real weapons. They looked like toys made of thin iron sheets. Although it was bright and shiny, it would tremble from time to time. It reminded people of those street performers who played with swords and knives. His right hand was carrying a bulging blue bundle with white flowers on it. She carried bedding, clothes and food. Even if this young lady had a slender figure, she looked bloated after carrying so many things on her back. That's right, he's a street performer. This was also their identity. At this moment, Grandmother Bean and Mother Ling, who looked like a coolie, were standing on a piece of scorched land. There were 6 or 7 tents behind them, which meant that 6 or 7 families lived here. They just arrived a few days ago. They built a shelter here and planned to slowly reclaim the land. They just asked the family. They said that if they walked for another 7 miles, they would reach the former city of Wei. They also advised them not to go further. The land near the city of Wei had been burned for dozens of days, and the land had already dried up. Nothing could grow within a radius of 10 miles. Even the grass seeds were baked into dust. It was better to live with these people and help each other. It's not a good idea to live with a mother and a daughter. You need a man. It's better to stay here and start a family. She kept persuading them like this for the whole night. But neither Grandmother Bean nor Mother Ling said anything. After saying goodbye to these reclaimers, the two continued to walk towards the direction of the city of Wei. After walking for about an hour, even the grass and wood ashes that had been mixed with the soil under their feet had disappeared, leaving only a thin layer of yellow sand. The air was getting drier and drier, and there was a gloomy coldness in the air. This coldness was not simply the coldness of the autumn night. It seemed to be because of something else. After another quarter of an hour, the silhouette of the city of Wei appeared on the horizon like a giant crawling beast. Grandmother Bean stopped walking and the dry soil under her feet rustled. Then she turned around and looked to the west. To the west was the surging Wei River. Although they couldn't see the river from such a distance, they could hear the faint sound of the water. In the past there were large tracts of farmland here. Walking along the path beside the farmland, they could see a small ferry crossing. But now it was all gone, leaving only the wilderness. Grandmother Bean stretched out a hand from under her cloak and pointed to the west. You said that the last time Li Yunxin met Long Jiu was at this ferry crossing? Mother Ling also stopped walking. She first took a breath, then looked to the west. She slightly narrowed her eyes. After a while she said softly, yes. Grandmother Bean took back her hand after getting this response. Anything else? Mother Ling was stunned. We only met and talked. Nothing else. Grandmother Bean tilted her head slightly and looked at her daughter, with the corner of her eyes. But in her eyes, there was a coldness that didn't match her identity and appearance. Think again. Mother Ling shivered slightly and bit her lips. After thinking for a while, she said in a low voice, When he returned to the city that day, he met me on the road. That day I followed him out of the city. Then, the two of us walked back along the road. That day someone died in the city and on the road, there was a stage. There was someone singing on the stage. As he thought, he talked slowly, and in small detail he talked a great deal. Grandmother Bean didn't rush her, but listened to her patiently for nearly half an hour. But in between she would ask some detailed questions such as, did he frown at that time? Did he say, definitely, or definitely? Was his footsteps fast or slow? Mother Ling could answer some questions but she couldn't remember some. When she finished talking and Grandmother Bean also finished asking, the middle-aged woman said, You have to remember. If you remember anything, any detail, you have to tell me. Whether it's useful or not is up to me, not you. If you are half as smart as you think, how could you be killed by Li Yunxin? After saying this, she walked away. Mother Ling didn't dare to say anything more. She just pursed her lips and followed. After half an hour, the two arrived at the gate of the city of Wei. This was the south gate of the city of Wei, called Yuaning Gate. Under the moonlight, they could see that the gate was still intact and hadn't collapsed. Looking inside, it was pitch black, as if there were countless evil spirits hiding inside. Grandmother Bean slowed down a little and Mother Ling understood. She said in a low voice, That day I entered the gate from here. When I came to the city of Wei, while talking they walked forward. Mother Ling described everything she saw that day in detail, as if she had reconstructed the scene at that time. Who would have thought that the once flourishing city of Wei would now be left with nothing but ruins, not even rats and insects? In the darkness there were only two people's footsteps and voices. It sounded very strange. He wandered around the city for many days and gave away many paintings. He also carved some marks on the stone. Unknowingly, the two had walked along the dried-up Willow River for a mile, and came to a green stone. I also saw marks on this stone. But only half of them, and there was no reiki flowing. The green stone that Mother Ling mentioned was next to the Willow River. Looking at it now, there were no marks. It seemed that a layer of the stone had been shaved off by a sword, and there were several cracks on it. It looked like it was smelted by fire. He gave the beggar a painting. Later the beggar was killed in the alley. While listening to her, Grandmother Bean slowly attached herself to the stone. Her hands were still in the sleeves and she squinted at the green stone for a while. Then she slowly stretched out her hand and drew half a symbol on the green stone. Like this? Mother Ling took a closer look. No. She thought for a while expressionlessly and changed the pattern. Like this? But also not. Grandmother Bean was not in a hurry. If Mother Ling said no, she erased it. She used her palm to erase it from the surface of the stone, and then drew something else. Just like that he tried for 4 hours. For 2 hours she bent over and didn't move and only her hand moved. He had tried more than 1,000 of those rune imprints. In the end, even Mother Ling was a little discouraged and said cautiously, "Granny, maybe we should go to other places first?" Grandmother Bean looked at her with a serious and cold gaze. "Now you are a useless person. Do you know that if you want to regain your cultivation from us, you have to go through a lot of hardships? If you don't even have this kind of patience, humph, you can kill yourself now." Mother Ling was silent. Another hour passed. When Grandmother Bean wrote the 1646th rune on the stone, Mother Ling's eyes finally showed a light of relief. She looked carefully for a while and took a deep breath. "Yes." Grandmother Bean stood up and stared at the rune for a while. She slowly frowned. "What does it mean?" She was talking to herself and didn't ask for advice. Mother Ling didn't say anything. After thinking for half an hour she walked away. The places they went and the places they stopped at were all the places Li Yunxin had stopped at in the city of Wei a few days before she possessed Qi. So a whole night passed. When the sun rose again, Mother Ling had fallen asleep leaning against a broken wall. As for Grandmother Bean, she was standing on a tall stone pillar. This stone pillar used to be a part of the most prosperous restaurant in the city, Xianghua Restaurant. She squinted her eyes and looked down at the whole city with the morning light. Although most of the buildings had been burned down, the crisscrossing streets were still there. She watched from the moment the first rays of the sun appeared on the horizon until the first rays of the morning sun rose into the sky. Then she closed her eyes and thought silently for a while. She opened her eyes again and took out a booklet from her clothes. This booklet was the Prefecture Annals, Annals of the Wei River. In it were detailed records of the population and the size of the fields in the various towns and cities. The city of Wei used to be a big city, so the records were very detailed, to the point of which streets and alleys, which households, how many people and how old they were. After reading for an hour, Grandmother Bean threw the annals away, and the booklet burned before it fell to the ground. Then she slowly raised her hand and there was a magic pen in her hand. She began to draw something in the void with mysterious light. The background was the whole city of Wei in her sight. After a quarter of an hour she stopped. A human figure with all the meridians and acupoints appeared in front of her. The background was also the whole city of Wei. Chapter 436. Dragon King is a proud man. But, if the fake sage's request makes Dragon King angry, don't be impulsive. In any case, just agree to it for the time being. We will slowly mediate. There will always be a chance. Xan Shilio said to Li Yunxin while they were walking in a grotto. 6 hours ago, the two of them took the star shuttle carried by Xan Shilio and arrived at Cloud Mountain in the blink of an eye. Li Yunxin had originally wanted to take a closer look at Yunshan's appearance, but the star shuttle didn't allow him to do so. When the magical treasure flew, there was a layer of frost on the outside, completely blocking the scenery outside, so he couldn't see anything. Perhaps this was the arrangement of the Freemasonry. They didn't want Li Yunxin to know too many secrets for the time being. It reminded him of the world in which he had come from, where terrorist groups blindfolded people when they took them to their lair. When the magic treasure was put away again, Li Yunxin and Xan Shilio were in this grotto. According to Xan Shilio, this grotto was in the hinterland of Cloud Mountain. It was 3 or 4 miles away from the outermost layer of Cloud Mountain. The star shuttle they were on also flew directly into the black hole from another long passage. Although it was a grotto, it looked more like it was artificially excavated. The ground was flat and the stone walls on both sides were also flat. The top was domed, and the cross-section was like a piece of bread. It was very long. At this time, the two of them had been walking for a quarter of an hour, but they still hadn't reached the end. Xan Shilio began to look worried, which was in sharp contrast to her calmness in front of Ku Chanzi. It seemed that the closer she got to the two sages, the more nervous and frightened she became. She told Li Yunxin a lot of things as if she was afraid that he would really anger the two sages and get out of Cloud Mountain. After walking for another quarter of an hour, she stopped and said, "Dragon King, this is as far as I can go. Further ahead is the forbidden area of Cloud Mountain. Without the summons of the fake sage I can't enter." The light in this grotto was dim. However, there seemed to be mushrooms refined with spiritual power on the walls, which emitted a faint fluorescence. This made Xan Shilio's face clearer. She bit her lips. "Once something happens, does the Dragon King need me to do anything?" Li Yunxin was silent along the way. At this time he also stopped. He looked at Xan Shilio and thought for a moment. Then he smiled and shook his head. "Don't worry. I'm here to tell them something, not to die." Even so, Xan Shilio was still not at ease. Li Yunxin was silent for a while and said, "I have a way out. Go ahead." After saying this, he suddenly reached out and rubbed Xan Shilio's head. The little girl did not have a Taoist name, nor did she wear a Taoist robe. Her hair was not tied up in a Taoist bun, but a bun that was close to the clouds. Thus, when Li Yunxin gently rubbed and retracted his hand, she realized what he had done. For a moment she was a little stunned. But being stunned and shy was not her character. She laughed again and pretended to be annoyed. Li Yunxin laughed and walked forward. The smile on Xan Shilio's face gradually faded. When Li Yunxin's figure gradually disappeared, she raised her head and gently touched her bun. He used a little force so it was not messed up. Then she put her hand down and sighed with mixed feelings. A way out. Li Yunxin disappeared after taking another 6 steps forward. In fact, there was still a long way to go before he and Xan Shilio parted ways. The end was hidden in the darkness and could not be seen clearly. He thought he would have to walk for another 15 minutes. Actually, after taking 6 steps forward, he suddenly saw a bright light. It was as if with a single step, he had stepped into the warm spring from the dark and gloomy cave. Suddenly, a vast world opened up in front of him. The blue sky and white clouds rushed toward him. There was also a warm wind, the fragrance of flowers and trees, and the distant chirping of birds. Now he was on a cliff. There were cliffs all around him. Dense vegetation grew on the cliff, covering the rock wall tightly. He frowned slightly and turned around. He found that the road he came from had disappeared. There was a stone wall behind him. He tried to push it with his hand. The stone wall was very hard. It was not an illusion. So he turned around and looked ahead. He saw a small cloud mountain. An upside-down mountain was floating in the air. There were pavilions and terraces on the small mountain. It was covered with verdant vegetation and gorgeous flowers. It was like a fairyland. In this wider space there were mountains, rivers, blue sky and white clouds. It was like a complete small world. This was the residence of the 2 sages that Xan Shilio told him. According to what she had said, the 2 saints should be on that small mountain floating in the sky. Li Yunxin thought for a while and decided to go up the mountain. This place did not have the imposing manner of facing a great enemy, nor were there any enemies eyeing them covetously. They looked kind, elegant and kind. But this kind of enemy was much more difficult to deal with than those guys who were bearing their fangs and claws. However, just as he took a step forward and was about to fly away, he suddenly heard a voice. "Wei River Dragon King is the royal family of the water. Do you know the Ruoshui River?" The person who spoke was very close to him, but he did not notice it. He immediately stopped and raised his hand to look ahead. He saw an old man with white hair and beard standing in the air. No, he was not standing in the air. He was stepping on a bird the size of half a palm. Usually only the 2 sages lived on the small cloud mountain. This old man should be the so-called sage of calligrapher. If he saw a real sage, it referred to the kind of sage whose body and soul had merged into one, and both were in their peak state. He might feel a little nervous and awestruck. This emotion was because the other party had a power that was beyond the knowledge of the world. However, none of the so-called sages he had met were in such a state. Among them, some only had memories, some had incarnations, and some were like the one in front of him. Only the physical body was real, but the inside was a Freemasonry wandering soul. They could be counted as high-level wandering souls. So he only paused for a moment and then smiled. His tone was gentle and calm without any fear. "Isn't the Ruoshui River surrounding the 10 Directions world?" "Of course I have heard of it." "Your Excellency, how should I address you?" The old man also smiled. "This is the small cloud mountain, the residence of the 2 sages. Wei River Dragon King, don't you know who I am?" Li Yunxin was still smiling, but he squinted his eyes. It is because I know who you are that I have to ask. The current sage of calligrapher's real name is Su Yusong. Are you the real one? His words were not friendly. However, the old man was not angry and his temper was not provoked. After a moment of silence, he let out a sigh. So it is about this matter. Last. He reached out his hand and pointed at Li Yunxin. Wei River Dragon King's body is not Li Yunxin's body. Do you still think you are someone else? Besides, I have been Su Yusong for 1,000 years. After such a long time. I don't care who I was before and who I am now. After all, it is just a name. Just like Wei River Dragon King, Wei River Lord, Li Yunxin, aren't they all you? Li Yunxin nodded. That makes sense. Then I will call you Su Weng. Su Weng suddenly asked Ruo Water, what does that mean? Su Yusong raised his hand and pointed around. Wei River Lord, you know about Ruo Water. You should know that Ruo Water can't carry anything, not even a feather. In this small cloud mountain it is like Ruo Water. If you stepped out just now, you would have fallen straight down like a mortal. Li Yunxin was slightly surprised. He had heard about the story of Ruo Water. It was said that this land was the midland of the 10 Directions world, which was extremely vast. Surrounding the midland were many oceans. Beyond the oceans there was Ruo Water. There was no obvious boundary between Ruo Water and the ocean. However, Ruo Water couldn't carry anything and no one could cross it. If someone sailed in the ocean and crossed the boundary between the ocean and Ruo Water, he would immediately sink, never to float again. Both the person and the boat would soon be crushed into flat pancakes, and there would be no chance of survival. If it wasn't a human being but a cultivator or a spirit creature, what would happen if he left the shore and flew into the vast Ruo Water? Unbelievably, no one ever found out. Because the Taoist gate didn't allow this. Of course, the Taoist gate didn't have its own consciousness. This consciousness probably came from the divine beings. It was said that deep in the Ruo Water, there was a palace of the divine beings in the human world. The divine beings didn't want their pure land to be spied on by ordinary people. Therefore, they ordered Dao Tong to set up sentry posts in the ocean surrounding the midland, and forbade cultivators to go deep into the Ruo Water. However, there would always be people who disobeyed the rules. Throughout the tens of thousands of years, how could there not be rebellious cultivators and spirit creatures who wanted to try? No one ever succeeded. Leaving the ocean and flying on the surface of the Ruo Water, no matter how high they flew, they would be affected by the Ruo Water. Their spirit power would be drained quickly. Even the most powerful cultivators and spirit creatures could only fly for hundreds of miles. Of course, this referred to those who flew out and then flew back. Some of them didn't even think about going back and used the last bit of their power to move forward, so they never came back. Li Yunxin had only heard about this from his parents. However, back then he wasn't very powerful, and he didn't see many powerful spirit creatures and high-level cultivators. Therefore, he only felt that this was just one of the all kinds of magical things in this world. Was there anything more surprising than the fact that spirit creatures really existed in this world? But now he had experienced a lot and his cultivation had gradually improved. Therefore he understood more principles and rules. He also knew that, even in this world, not everything was magical without rules. Spirit creatures, their spirit power system or spirit creature power system all followed another set of principles. People had cultivated for tens of thousands of years, and this set of principles had slowly been perfected and could be applied to almost every field of cultivation. For example, creating a new kind of magic, you didn't even have to try it yourself. As long as you simulated how to do it in your mind and how to guide spirit power, you could deduce the possible results according to the orthodox cultivation system. Therefore, for some other things, you could also judge whether it was possible or impossible, according to the common sense of cultivation. But the problem was that the Ruo Water. According to what he knew now, it was obviously impossible. The legendary Ruo Water sounded like some kind of terrible restriction. This kind of restriction brutally prohibited all spirit power, spirit creature power, and even all kinds of rules and powers that were common in the secular world. Something of this level, even the two sages couldn't make it. This was not referring to lack of ability, but contrary to the entire cultivation system. But now, in this Shaoyin mountain, Su Yusong told him that there was such a thing. One of the things that Li Yunxin was most interested in since he came to this world was cultivation. Now that he encountered this most interesting thing that puzzled him the most, he immediately became extremely curious. Seeing his slightly surprised expression, Su Yusong stood on the bird and smiled. But there is a way, for example with the power of this bird, you can also come and go freely. Dragon King may not be very good at this, I can explain it to Dragon King. At this point he suddenly found that Li Yunxin's eyes lit up. Su Yusong had been the art sage for as long as 1,000 years. Since he had almost forgotten his previous identity, naturally he couldn't remember the time when his original body as a wandering soul was still a child. Therefore for a moment he didn't understand what the sudden burst of light in Li Yunxin's eyes meant. The next moment, Li Yunxin suddenly leaped forward a big step. Su Yusong hurriedly said, I have already said here, so, Li Yunxin's step really missed and his whole body fell straight down. He was 2 miles away from the ground, a height of 1,000 meters. Looking down from here, the river was just a blue ribbon, and the vast forest was also like moss. However, when Li Yunxin fell he put his hands behind his back, as if he was playing. The process of falling only lasted for a dozen blinks of an eye, only to hear a bang. Suddenly a small yellow shallow pit appeared on the green ground. This was naturally from Su Yusong's point of view. Li Yunxin fell into the forest. She didn't even bend her knees. However, he was a powerful god and demon, so he was naturally unharmed. But a small patch of trees where his feet landed was knocked over by him, and more trees around him were swept down. He looked up at the sky again, frowned slightly and sighed lightly. It was not mainly because he wanted to jump for fun, but he wanted to try this space that was no different from the weak water, as the art sage said. The result was a little disappointment and a little surprise. The disappointment was that there was no special experience, such as the flow of spiritual power was not smooth, the snow mountain and ocean of chi was sealed, or the body was restrained. Everything was still the same and his body was not affected at all. It was also because of this, everything was normal but the supernatural power did not work. The demonic power could flow along the meridians but it did not work. It was like people knew that water could put out a fire, now a pile of wood was on fire, but it could not be extinguished with cold water. This was indeed a strange restraint that could not be explained by the cultivation theory that he knew. After 2 breaths, Su Yusong also rushed down. He was still standing in the air, looking at Li Yunxin strangely. Is Dragon King playing around? Li Yunxin looked up and smiled, looking at him. It's just, at this point he suddenly paused. The expression on his face gradually changed, and the smile on his face slowly disappeared. He stared at Su Yusong, and a slightly scary thought suddenly flashed in his mind. Chapter 437. Su Yusong also frowned because of his performance. What does Dragon King want to say? Li Yunxin looked at his face. He was hesitating. This was a very rare thing for him. He always did things according to his heart and made decisions decisively. Usually, if he hesitated for more than 10 breaths, he would be considered indecisive. However, Su Yusong, who was staring at the air, thought again and again, then suddenly lowered his voice and said, Could it be that the 2 of you are imprisoned? Su Yusong's expression suddenly changed. Previously he was smiling faintly, which was really the demeanor of a master. But now the expression on his face froze for a moment, and then changed into a mysterious smile. In fact, it seemed that it was just making the muscles on his face twitch, making an expression similar to a smile. Then he stood on the flying bird and lowered his head. He stared at Li Yunxin with a pair of frighteningly bright eyes. Dragon King, why do you say that? Li Yunxin thought for a moment. Because I suddenly thought of something. After I arrived in Weiqing, everyone was thinking about my translucent jade slip. But they were all a group of small fries, and they even called themselves the 2 holy emissaries, he said slowly, thinking as he spoke. He felt that many questions that he didn't understand at that time were now slowly being solved. The Freemasons also came and they also wanted the translucent jade slip. At that time, I didn't know the relationship between the Freemasons and Xianmen, so I didn't feel strange. But later, I slowly understood and began to feel that something was wrong, since Xianmen is almost under the control of the Freemasons. Why did the Freemasons and Xianmen not seem to be on the same side and they don't seem to know each other? Since the saints want to do something, why do they have to be sneaky and only send cannon fodder? Is such a petty act really the work of a saint? After that, when other people came and wanted to join forces to kill me, they almost didn't mention the translucent jade slip. Or they only wanted to kill me, because I killed the Freemasons and offended their dignity. They wanted revenge. Either that or the Daotong Kenzo are here to seek revenge for the deaths of their fellow disciples. It's a mess. Li Yunxin shook his head in confusion and paced a few steps on the spot. The fallen branches and leaves under his feet rustled as he stepped on them, and a burst of fragrance rose up. And most importantly, he breathes a sigh of relief and looks up at Su Yusong. When we were near Dongting, Kun Wuzi could overturn Dongting with just one incarnation, and he was just in the mysterious realm of the first level. Above that, there was the profoundness of life realm, and above that was the supreme oblivion realm. On the other hand, the two sages have been in this realm for 1,000 years. If they really wanted to obtain the translucent jade slip, wouldn't it have been a piece of cake? He was silent for a while. But you never showed up in person. He has never displayed any divine abilities. The corner of Su Yusong's mouth twitched. The bird under his feet also lowered slightly. He leaned over and jumped down from the bird, landing in front of Li Yunxin. Then, go on. His tone was a little lighter. It seemed that he didn't want to disturb Li Yunxin's thinking so that he couldn't hear more wonderful deductions. His behavior, expression, and tone actually didn't match his appearance with white hair and beard. It looked like the soul of a young man had been stored in an old body. But here you actually have to step on the bird. Li Yunxin raised his hand and pointed to the sky. This means that in this space you also lost a lot of divine abilities and you can't even dance in the air. Since Mount Shaoyun is the residence of the two sages, why did they make this kind of inhibition that even they couldn't break? Su Yusong let out a soft, ah, but you also lost your divine abilities. Li Yunxin smiled, yes, but because it was me. Only in terms of physical strength. What if it was the Shinryu? Wouldn't you be courting death? So I was thinking, you didn't want the Freemasonry to know that you were looking for the translucent jade slip. Now you found a Taoist Danqing to send me here directly. You haven't left this place and there is a prohibition here. Are you guys imprisoned? Are you imprisoned by the Freemasonry? Su Yusong didn't answer his question. Instead, he was silent for a while and looked at Li Yunxin strangely. I heard before that you are smart and arrogant. Now that I see it, it's a little interesting. After saying this, he raised his head and looked at the place where Li Yunxin came from. From the time you came here until now, it has only been a quarter of an hour. You suspect that I am imprisoned. Others can't say this. Li Yunxin frowned and smiled. This expression seemed to indicate that he was a little impatient with Su Yusong's roundabout way of speaking. But he still gave some patience. You said that I am impatient. Yes, I am impatient. I should get along with you for a few more days, talk to you a few more times, and observe the situation of your Mount Shaoyun. Then we can probe each other, and when there are more details I will say what I think. It should be like this. Li Yunxin shook his head, but in fact most people's opinions on a matter can be formed in a very short period of time. It's just that they don't dare to think about it and don't dare to say it. So what if they say it? If it's right, we can be honest. If it's wrong, we can give up on a wrong path. We won't go further. What's more, I don't have too much time. He slightly emphasized, in fact, there are still 10 days. Zither King planted a ball of demonic power in my body. He said that if I don't appear in front of him after 10 days, I will die. So, I hope that we can be frank, such as why you want to see me and not kill me and what do I want to do here. Don't do those fake things. You should know what happens to those who want to do these things with me. The last few words were said in an overbearing manner. As if he wasn't facing a sage but someone of the same realm as him. Su Yusong didn't say anything. After looking at him for a while, he suddenly stretched out his hand. Li Yunxin had heard before that this move of his looks extremely slow, but it feels unavoidable, but he always thought it was nonsense. But now he actually experienced this feeling. Su Yusong stretched out his hand about to touch his forehead. He frowned slightly and stepped back. But just as this thought came to him, the finger had already touched his forehead. He was shocked. The finger touched and then withdrew. Then Su Yusong stroked his snow-white beard. There is indeed a ball of demonic power. And I can't get rid of it for a while. Zither King, this is a clever move. Not only to verify the truth of his words, but also to respond to his disrespect just now. Then he looked at Li Yunxin seriously. It's a good thing that you are so impatient. After so many years of training, I'm used to the slow movements of those Taoist priests and swordsmen. But seeing you is an exception. As for your question about whether I'm imprisoned, Su Yusong smiled. Are you referring to my body or the wandering souls in my body? By saying this, he almost admitted Li Yunxin's inference. That was unexpected. For such a long time, anyone from the Freemasonry or the celestial sect he had met didn't seem to like to talk nicely. Their temperaments were extreme and eccentric, and it was extremely difficult to communicate with them. He thought this fake sage would be even more difficult to talk to, but he didn't expect it to be like this. Li Yunxin was a little stunned. While he was stunned, Su Yusong stepped forward and walked into the dense forest. I planned to tell you when we reached the mountain. But I didn't expect you to be an impatient person like me. Dragon King, let's talk as we walk. When he said this, even the faint smile on his face disappeared. His face became solemn, as if he had accepted Li Yunxin as his ally in his heart and planned to talk to him about something very important. Li Yunxin always did things unexpectedly. But he didn't expect to be defeated by Su Yusong as soon as he entered Cloud Mountain. He frowned suspiciously. He stared at Su Yusong for a long time before he raised his feet to follow. There were strange things every year, but this year there were especially many. The vegetation in this forest was verdant, and the giant trees towered into the sky. The grass on the ground was like a carpet and the flowers were gorgeous. No one knew how many years they had experienced. The light shining from the treetops was no different from the sunlight outside. He didn't know if some kind of magical power had been cast on the top of the sky. When Li Yunxin caught up with him and walked side by side with him, Su Yusong continued, "That Taoist artifact and 4 magic treasures, are you happy with them?" Li Yunxin was taken aback by his words. But this surprise was like the wind that swept through his heart. His face didn't change and he said lightly, "I just refined them. I can't use them as I wish." Su Yusong smiled, "Those 4 magic treasures are our greeting gifts to Dragon King." "You, me, and the sword saint that Dragon King spoke of." Li Yunxin snorted softly, "The way you two give gifts is very unique." As they spoke, they had already entered the forest. This forest was very lush and the sun couldn't be seen as if it was dusk. In such an environment, Su Yusong seemed to be much more at ease. Thus he turned his head and looked at Li Yunxin. "Gold photon? Sir, I know that she has offended Dragon King very badly, so this time I gave her the magic treasures and told her to welcome you." "She went to welcome you. If she wanted to shake hands with you and reconcile, then that Taoist artifact could save her life. Gold photon is actually a very capable and courageous person. If she wanted to kill you, then that would be exactly what you wanted. If she died, the 4 magic treasures would fall into your hands. Consider them our greeting gifts to you, the magic treasures and her." Li Yunxin was silent for a while, "Using your own kind as a chess piece and giving it away just like that. I don't know if I should say that my reputation is big, or your methods are ruthless. What if she killed me? Then you're not worth our effort anymore." Su Yusong laughed, his beard and hair fluttering in the wind. "Dragon King's cultivation is not top-notch. What we value is your ability and mind to bring chaos to the world. If you can't even deal with a mere gold photon, what use are you to us? Then what use do I have to you now?" Su Yusong stopped and looked at him. "Didn't you come to Cloud Mountain to tell us about the demon's arrangements and plans? You're tuning in to the Han Li's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure."